Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The neon vacancy sign flickered like a dying firefly, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. I should have kept driving. Should have trusted that gnawing feeling in my gut. But fatigue clouded my judgment. And the thought of another hour on the road with two cranky kids in the backseat made the rundown Desert Palms motel seem like an oasis. I pulled our SUV into a space near the office, the headlights illuminating peeling paint and boarded up windows. Or just staying for the night, I reassured my wife, Sarah, as much as myself. She nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The bell above the door jangled discordantly as I stepped into the office. The air inside was thick and musty, like old books left in a damp basement. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as worn as the motel itself. Sunken cheeks, yellowed teeth, and eyes that didn't quite focus on me. "Need a room," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The clerk's gaze drifted over my shoulder, as if looking at something, or someone, behind me. I turned, but there was only the empty parking lot visible through the grimy window. "Just you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "No, my wife and two kids are in the car." A smile crept across his face, slow and unsettling. "Family vacation, eh? How nice." He reached for a key on the pegboard behind him, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Room 13, end of the row, nice and quiet." As I paid in cash, the credit card machine was conveniently broken. I couldn't shake the feeling that the clerk was studying me, memorizing every detail. His eyes never left me as I backed out of the office, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Sarah was already unloading bags when I returned to the car. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my expression. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Let's get settled." We woke the kids, their drowsy complaints adding to the symphony of crickets and distant highway noise. As we trudged to our room, I couldn't help but notice how empty the parking lot was. In the flickering neon light, I counted only two other cars. Room 13 smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, peeled at the corners. Two queen beds dominated the space, their worn comforters a relic from another decade. "It's just for one night," Sarah said, echoing my earlier reassurance. She began unpacking what we'd need for the morning while I got the kids settled. It was nearly midnight by the time we crawled into bed. Sarah fell asleep almost instantly, her soft breathing a counterpoint to the rattling air conditioner. I lay awake, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, unable to shake the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. A sound outside caught my attention, footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, careful not to wake Sarah. Peering through a gap in the dusty curtains, I scanned the parking lot. At first I saw nothing. Then, a movement caught my eye. A figure stood in the shadows near the ice machine, barely visible in the dim light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing that seemed to melt into the night. He was staring directly at our room. I blinked, sure I was imagining things. But when I looked again, he was still there, motionless as a statue. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just another guest, maybe stepping out for a late-night smoke. But something about his stance, the way he seemed to be watching our room with such intensity, set off every alarm bell in my head. I debated waking Sarah but decided against it. No need to scare her if it was nothing. Instead, I kept watch, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake the kids. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the figure moved. He took a step forward, then another, Emerging from the shadows into the sickly glow of the parking lot lights, I could see him more clearly now. A face partially obscured by a baseball cap, hands shoved deep in the pockets of a dark jacket. He walked with purpose, heading straight for our room. My mouth went dry, and I felt the icy fingers of panic grip my chest. This wasn't normal, this wasn't right. I rushed to wake Sarah, shaking her gently but urgently. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. "Sarah, wake up. We need to go." She stirred, confusion clouding her face. What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," I said, already moving to gather our things. "Someone watching our room. We need to leave. Now." To her credit, Sarah didn't question me. She saw the fear in my eyes and sprang into action, waking the kids while I threw our belongings haphazardly into bags. A knock at the door froze us in our tracks. Heavy, insistent, not the polite tap of hotel staff. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just another knock, louder this time. Sarah huddled with the kids, their eyes wide with fear. I motioned for them to be quiet and stay back. Heart pounding, I approached the door. Through the peephole, I could see the man from the parking lot. He was looking down, his face still obscured by the cap. "What do you want?" I demanded, my hand on the door chain. He looked up then, straight into the peephole. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Not anger, not exactly. Something else. Something hungry. "Open the door," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, buying time as Sarah continued to gather our things as quietly as possible. "You shouldn't be here," he replied. "This isn't a safe place for families." A chill ran through me. Was this a threat or a warning? "We're leaving," I said. "Just give us a few minutes to pack up." "No," he said, urgency creeping into his voice. "You need to leave now, right now." The door handle jiggled. Sarah stifled a gasp, clutching the kids closer. I made a split-second decision. "Okay," I called out. "We're coming out. Just give us space, all right?" I turned to Sarah and mouthed, "Back door." She nodded, understanding immediately. Thankfully, like many old motels, this room had a rear exit. As I kept talking to the man through the door, Sarah ushered the kids towards the back, our bags in hand. "We're just getting dressed," I said loudly, masking the sound of the back door opening. "We'll be right out." As soon as Sarah gave me the nod that they were clear, I made my move. I yanked the door open, startling the man on the other side. Without hesitation, I shoved past him, sprinting towards the back of the motel. I could hear him shouting behind me, his heavy footsteps giving chase. But fear lent speed to my legs, and I quickly caught up with Sarah and the kids. "The car," I gasped, fumbling for the keys. We piled in, the engine roaring to life just as the man rounded the corner of the building. In the rearview mirror, I could see others emerging from the shadows. The clerk, guests I hadn't seen before, all moving with that same purposeful, predatory gait. I floored it, tires screeching as we peeled out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I watched as the figures grew smaller, standing in the road behind us like silent sentinels. We drove for hours, putting as much distance between us and the Desert Palms Motel as possible. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, we pulled into a busy truck stop. Over steaming cups of coffee, Sarah and I tried to make sense of what had happened. Were they criminals, a cult, or just some sick game played on unsuspecting travelers? We never found out. A quick internet search revealed nothing about the Desert Palms Motel. No reviews, no listings, not even an address. It was as if it had never existed. As we pulled back onto the highway, continuing our journey, I couldn't shake the image of those figures standing in the road, watching us drive away. I'd always thought of horror as something supernatural, ghosts, monsters, things that go bump in the night. But now I knew better. True horror wore a human face. It lurked in rundown motels on lonely highways, waiting for unsuspecting families to stumble into its web. We drove on, the desert stretching endlessly before us. But every time I saw a neon vacancy sign flickering in the distance, I pressed the accelerator a little harder, the memory of that night urging me to keep moving, to stay in the light, to never again trust the false promise of refuge in the darkness. The dusty tome fell open with a sickening crack, releasing a cloud of ancient particles that danced in the dim light of the library's hidden alcove. As the dust settled, my eyes locked onto a page of cramped, spidery writing. The words seemed to writhe on the yellowed paper, and a chill ran down my spine as I read the first line. On this day, a darkness will descend upon our town, born from the depths of man's own wickedness. The date scrawled at the top of the page was tomorrow's date, 150 years in the future from when the book was written. I'm Evelyn Marsh, and I've been the head librarian at Millbrook Public Library for over a decade. I thought I knew every nook and cranny of this old building, every book on its shelves. But I was wrong. So very wrong. It started on a Tuesday, one of those dreary autumn days when the sky hangs low and heavy, threatening rain that never quite falls. I was reorganizing the local history section, a task I'd been putting off for months. The library was quiet, just the occasional rustle of pages or muffled cough from the few patrons scattered about. As I shifted a particularly heavy shelf, my hand brushed against something behind it. Curious, I peered into the gap and saw the edge of what looked like a curtain. My heart quickened as I pulled the shelf further out, revealing a hidden alcove I'd never known existed. The space was small, barely big enough for a person to stand in. But it was the contents that made my breath catch in my throat. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books unlike any I'd seen before. Their spines were unmarked, bound in cracked leather that seemed to absorb the light. I reached for the nearest one, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it from the shelf. That's when I found the first prediction, the one about darkness descending on our town. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a vague prophecy that could apply to anything. But as I flipped through more pages, my disbelief turned to horror. The book detailed events in Millbrook's history with uncanny accuracy. Fires, floods, scandals that had rocked our small community. But it didn't stop at the present. It continued on, describing future events with the same matter-of-fact tone. I spent hours in that alcove, poring over the books, my mind reeling with each new revelation. By the time I emerged, the library was closed, darkness pressing against the windows. I locked up mechanically, my thoughts still trapped in that hidden room. That night, I barely slept. The words from the books swirled in my head, prophecies of doom mingling with mundane predictions about weather and local elections. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was all an elaborate hoax, but deep down, a part of me knew these books held power, knowledge that no one should possess. The next morning, I arrived at the library early, determined to make sense of what I'd discovered. As I unlocked the front door, a gust of wind nearly knocked me off my feet. Dark clouds roiled overhead just as the book had predicted. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through me. Throughout the day, I found myself checking the news obsessively, waiting for the darkness the book had mentioned. But nothing out of the ordinary happened. People came and went from the library, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. It wasn't until I was closing up that night that it happened. As I was ushering the last few patrons out, a commotion erupted outside. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Through the library's large front windows, I saw people running down the street, panic etched on their faces. My heart pounding. I stepped outside. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance, I could see an orange glow lighting up the sky. Fire. A big one, by the looks of it. It's the old mill. Someone shouted as they ran past. The whole thing's gone up. The old mill. My blood ran cold as I remembered another passage from the book. The forgotten bones of our town's industry shall be cleansed by fire, revealing secrets long buried. I stood there, frozen, as chaos erupted around me. People were evacuating nearby buildings, fire trucks screamed past, and all I could think about were those books hidden away in the library. Books that had known this was coming. In the days that followed, the fire at the mill was all anyone could talk about. As the book had predicted, the blaze revealed things long hidden, evidence of toxic waste dumping that had occurred decades ago. The scandal rocked our small town, leading to arrests and a flurry of legal action. I kept silent about the books, watching in growing horror as prediction after prediction came true. Small things at first, a surprise win in the mayoral race, an unusually harsh winter. But as time went on, the events grew more significant, more ominous. I became obsessed, spending every free moment in that hidden alcove, trying to decipher the cryptic writings. I started keeping a journal, documenting each fulfilled prophecy. My friends noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at every unexpected noise. But how could I explain? Who would believe me? Months passed, and the weight of knowledge pressed down on me like a physical thing. I found myself looking at my neighbors differently, wondering if they were mentioned in the book's dark future. Would they be victims, perpetrators? The lines began to blur. Then came the day I read about my own death. It was hidden in a passage about a guardian of knowledge, and who would he now pay the ultimate price for her curiosity? The date listed was just 2 weeks away. I felt the world tilt around me, the words swimming on the page as panic clawed at my throat. That night, as I lay awake in bed, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if the books weren't just predicting the future? What if they were shaping it? The idea took root, growing like a poisonous vine in my mind. I thought of all the tragedies I'd read about, all the suffering to come, and I knew what I had to do. The next night, I broke into the library. The hidden alcove seemed to be waiting for me, the air inside thick and expectant. I pulled the books from the shelves, piling them in the center of the room. My hands shook as I poured accelerant over them, the fumes making my eyes water. I hesitated, lighter in hand. Was I really going to do this? Destroy centuries of knowledge? But then I thought of the fire at the mill, of all the other predictions yet to come true, of my own impending doom. With a flick of my thumb, I lit the lighter and tossed it onto the pile. The flames caught quickly, hungrily devouring the ancient pages. I watched, mesmerized, as the books curled and blackened. Smoke filled the small space, acrid and thick. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't tear myself away. These books had consumed my life for months. It felt fitting that I should see their end. As the fire grew, I began to feel lightheaded. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. I turned to leave, but found myself disoriented. Which way was the exit? The flames were everywhere now, dancing at the edges of my vision. I stumbled, coughing, my lungs burning. In that moment, as consciousness began to slip away, a terrible clarity came over me. The books had predicted this too, the guardian of knowledge, paying the ultimate price. In trying to change the future, I had fulfilled it. As darkness closed in, my last thought was of the library, of all the stories held within its walls. Stories of hope, of love, of human perseverance. And I realized too late that in my fear of the dark predictions, I had forgotten about all the light that existed alongside them. They found my body the next morning, amidst the charred remains of the hidden alcove. The fire had been contained, thanks to the library's sprinkler system. But the books and their terrible secrets were gone. In the aftermath, as the town mourned and speculated, no one knew the full truth of what had happened that night. No one knew about the books that had predicted it all. And perhaps that was for the best. Some knowledge, I learned too late, is too dangerous to possess. But sometimes, in the quiet corners of the rebuilt library, patrons swear they can smell smoke, can hear the whisper of pages turning when no one's there. And in those moments, I wonder, did I really destroy all the books? Or are there more out there waiting to be discovered, waiting to reveal the dark futures yet to come? The first scream pierced the wilderness like a knife, echoing off the ancient trees and sending a flock of startled birds into the darkening sky. I froze mid-step, my hiking boot hovering above a gnarled root, as the sound faded into an eerie silence. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just an animal, a fox or a mountain lion. But deep down, I knew that scream was human, and it was filled with terror. I'm Alex, and I've been hiking solo through national parks for years. It's my escape, my way of reconnecting with nature and disconnecting from the chaos of everyday life. This trip to Redwood National Park was supposed to be no different. Just me, my backpack, and miles of towering trees. But as I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, I realized this journey was about to take a dark turn. The smart thing would have been to turn around, to head back to the main trail and alert the park rangers. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, propelled me forward. I veered off the marked path, pushing through dense underbrush, drawn by an urge I couldn't explain. As I pressed deeper into the forest, the light dimmed. The massive redwoods blocked out the setting sun, creating a twilight world of shadows and whispers. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and unfamiliar. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to warp in the depths of the forest. But suddenly, I emerged into a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. In the center stood a crude altar, fashioned from twisted branches and adorned with objects that made my stomach churn: bones, feathers, and things I couldn't or didn't want to identify. Around the altar, a group of figures moved in a slow, rhythmic dance. They wore dark robes that seemed to absorb the little light that filtered through the canopy. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but I could hear their low, guttural chanting. I dropped to my knees behind a fallen log, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they would hear it. This was wrong. This was so wrong. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was miles from civilization, witnessing something that shouldn't exist outside of horror movies. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed a figure lying on the altar. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a person, alive, but bound and struggling weakly against their restraints. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and one of the robed figures stepped forward, raising a curved blade that glinted dully in the fading light. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just watch this happen. But what could one hiker do against a group of knife-wielding cultists? As I wrestled with my conscience, a twig snapped under my foot. The sound was like a gunshot in the unnatural quiet of the clearing. The chanting stopped abruptly. As one, the robed figures turned towards my hiding place. I held my breath, pressing myself into the damp earth, praying they hadn't seen me. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a voice, raspy and cold, broke the silence. "We have an uninvited guest, brothers and sisters. How fortunate, the old ones always provide." A thrill of terror shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, all thoughts of stealth forgotten, and plunged back into the forest. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the crashing of undergrowth as the cultists gave chase. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just hours ago was now a maze of shadows and hidden dangers. Every tree looked the same, every path leading deeper into darkness. The voices behind me grew closer. They knew these woods. I realized with growing dread, this was their territory, and I was just a lost, stumbling intruder. A branch caught my backpack, yanking me off balance. I shrugged out of the straps, abandoning my supplies. Better to lose my gear than my life. As I ran, my mind raced through options. Did I have a chance of outrunning them until I reached the main trail? Could I find a hiding spot and wait them out? Or was I just delaying the inevitable? A flicker of light through the trees caught my eye. Fire. For a moment, hope surged through me. Campers, maybe, or even park rangers. But as I changed course towards the light, a horrible realization dawned. I had somehow run in a circle, ending up back near the clearing with the altar. I skidded to a stop at the edge of the firelight. The cultists had returned to their ceremony, but now they moved with an urgency that sent chills down my spine. The figure on the altar was thrashing wildly, their muffled screams barely audible over the frenzied chanting. I knew I should run, should use this chance to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. But the thought of leaving that person to die gnawed at me. I had to do something, even if it was stupid and reckless. Looking around desperately, I spotted a hefty branch lying nearby. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the branch and charged into the clearing, screaming at the top of my lungs. The element of surprise worked in my favor. The cultists scattered, momentarily stunned by my sudden appearance. I raced to the altar, my makeshift club swinging wildly. I managed to connect with one robed figure, sending them sprawling. I reached the altar and began tugging at the ropes binding the victim. Up close, I could see it was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. "I'm going to get you out of here," I gasped, my fingers fumbling with the knots. But my advantage was short-lived. A hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. I found myself face to face with one of the cultists, his hood thrown back to reveal a face contorted with rage. "Fool," he snarled. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion." I swung my branch, but he caught it easily, wrenching it from my grasp. As he raised it to strike, a piercing whistle cut through the air. The cultist froze, his head snapping towards the sound. "This is the park service. Everyone stay where you are." Relief flooded through me as flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Park rangers poured into the clearing, their shouts filling the air. The cultists broke ranks, fleeing into the woods, but the rangers were prepared. I watched in a daze as several were tackled and handcuffed. A ranger approached me, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right, sir? Are you injured?" I shook my head, still struggling to process what had happened. "I'm okay, but she needs help," I said, gesturing to the woman on the altar. As the ranger moved to free her, I sank to the ground, my legs finally giving out. The next few hours passed in a blur. I gave my statement to the rangers and local police, trying to describe what I'd seen without sounding completely insane. They assured me that they'd been tracking this cult for weeks, following reports of missing hikers and strange sightings in the park. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the clearing, I sat wrapped in a shock blanket, watching as forensics teams combed the area. The altar and other evidence were photographed and carefully removed. It all seemed surreal, like a dream I couldn't quite shake off. The young woman I'd tried to save was taken to a hospital. Before leaving, she gripped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "If you hadn't come..." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I nodded, unable to find words. In the days and weeks that followed, I gave more statements, attended identity comparison lineups, and tried to piece my life back together. The story made national news. Hiker uncovers deadly cult in National Park. But the headlines couldn't capture the terror of that night. The primal fear that still jolted me awake in the dead of night. I've been asked if I'll ever go hiking again, if I've sworn off solo trips into the wilderness. The truth is, I don't know. The forest that once felt like a sanctuary now holds shadows I can't unsee, but there's a part of me that refuses to let them win, to let them taint the natural world with their darkness. Sometimes, when the memories threaten to overwhelm me, I think of that young woman. I think of how close she came to becoming another missing hiker, another unsolved mystery. And I realize that as much as I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, I was also exactly where I needed to be. The cult members who were caught are facing trial. Some are cooperating with authorities, revealing the extent of their activities. But others remain silent, their eyes holding secrets that make me shudder. I know there are more out there, more hidden altars, more dark ceremonies taking place in the shadows of our wilderness. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'll ever truly escape that night in the forest. If a part of me will always be there, running through the endless trees, pursued by hooded figures and the echoes of inhuman chants. But then I look out my window, at the trees swaying in the breeze, at the birds soaring overhead, and I remember why I fell in love with nature in the first place. It's vast and wild and, yes, sometimes dangerous. But it's also beautiful and vital and worth protecting. So maybe, just maybe, I'll lace up my hiking boots again someday. But next time, I think I'll stick to the marked trails. Some parts of the wilderness I've learned are better left unexplored. The scream of the ambulance siren faded into the howling wind as I navigated the icy roads, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The address glowing on my GPS was unfamiliar, a lonely dot on the outskirts of town. As the snow swirled in my headlights, obscuring the world beyond, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. Something about this call felt different. Wrong. I'm Jake Holloway, paramedic for Millbrook Emergency Services. 10 years on the job, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me on that frigid winter night. The storm had been raging for hours, turning our small town into a ghostly landscape of white. Most people were hunkered down at home, waiting out the blizzard. But duty called, and when the emergency alert came through about a possible heart attack at a remote address, my partner Charlie and I loaded up the ambulance and headed out into the maelstrom. As we left the familiar streets behind, the world seemed to close in around us. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of white, and the wind buffeted the ambulance, threatening to push us off the narrow road. Charlie, usually a chatterbox, had fallen silent, his eyes fixed on the GPS as if willing it to guide us safely to our destination. And this can't be right, I muttered as we turned onto what was little more than a dirt track, now buried under inches of snow. Who lives all the way out here? Charlie shrugged, his face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. Dispatcher said it was an old man, probably some hermit who likes his privacy. I nodded, but the uneasy feeling in my gut only intensified. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, from any help if things went south. But there was no turning back now. Someone needed us, and it was our job to be there. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a structure loomed out of the darkness. It was a house, if you could call it that. More like a ramshackle cabin that looked like it might collapse under the weight of the snow on its roof. A single light flickered in a downstairs window, the only sign of life in this desolate place. I parked as close to the front door as I dared, not wanting to get stuck in the deep snow. As we grabbed our gear and stepped out into the howling wind, the cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath away. The snow was nearly up to my knees, and each step was a struggle as we made our way to the porch. The wood creaked ominously under our weight as I raised my hand to knock. Before my knuckles could make contact, the door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo in the stillness. An old man stood there, hunched and frail-looking, his rheumy eyes peering up at us from a face etched with deep lines. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, his voice barely audible over the wind. Come in, come in. He's upstairs." Charlie and I exchanged a glance. "Sir," I said, raising my voice to be heard, "we received a call about a possible heart attack. Are you all right?" The old man waved a gnarled hand dismissively. "Not me, you fool. My brother. He's the one who needs help. Hurry up now. He doesn't have much time." Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but I pushed them aside. We had a job to do. I nodded to Charlie, and we followed the old man into the house, dragging our equipment behind us. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered, every surface covered with stacks of newspapers, old books, and items I couldn't identify in the gloom. The air was thick with the musty smell of neglect and something else. Something metallic and unsettling. Up here, the old man called, already halfway up a narrow staircase. We followed, our boots leaving wet prints on the worn steps. The upper floor was even darker than the first, the only light coming from a single bare bulb swinging gently from the ceiling. The old man led us to a closed door at the end of the hallway. "In there," he said, gesturing with a trembling hand. "Please, help him." I reached for the doorknob, but Charlie's hand on my arm stopped me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Jake," he whispered, "something's not right here. We should call for backup." I hesitated. Charlie was right. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around to get out of this house and never look back. But I could hear labored breathing coming from behind the door. Someone was in there, someone who might need our help. "We can't leave," I said firmly. "Not if there's a chance we can save a life." Before Charlie could protest further, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, a coppery tang that made my stomach lurch. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam illuminated a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, overlapping and haphazardly pinned up. But these weren't family snapshots or vacation memories. These were images of death, crime scene photos, autopsy shots, pictures of accidents and murders and things too gruesome to comprehend. In the center of the room, on a bed that looked like it hadn't been changed in years, lay a figure. For a moment, I thought it was another corpse, captured in one of those terrible photographs. But then I saw the chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. "Oh God," Charlie whispered behind me. I heard the thud of our medical bags hitting the floor, followed by the sound of retching. I forced myself to move closer to the bed, my training kicking in despite the horror surrounding me. The man on the bed was ancient, his skin like parchment stretched over bone. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Sir," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Can you hear me? We're here to help." There was no response, no indication that he was aware of our presence. I reached for his wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but weak and thready. "Charlie," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to pull it together. We have a patient here." But Charlie wasn't listening. He was staring at the walls, his face a mask of terror. "Jake," he said, his voice cracking. "Look at the dates on these photos." I glanced at the nearest image, a gruesome shot of a car accident. The date stamp in the corner made my blood run cold. It was tomorrow's date. As the implications of what I was seeing sank in, a low chuckle came from the doorway. The old man who had let us in was standing there, a smile on his face that sent shivers down my spine. "You boys sure took your time getting here," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, more menacing. "But that's all right. You're right on schedule." I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin around me as I realized the terrible truth. We weren't here to save anyone. We were here to become part of this macabre collection. The old man's smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. "Don't worry," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Your pictures will look lovely on the wall." What happened next is a blur in my memory. There was a struggle, desperate and frantic. I remember the flash of a blade, Charlie's scream cut short, the taste of blood in my mouth. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline and blind luck, I managed to fight my way past the old man and down the stairs. I burst out of the house into the raging storm, not daring to look back. The wind tore at me as I stumbled through the deep snow, my only thought to get as far away from that house of horrors as possible. I don't know how long I ran, or how I managed to find my way back to civilization. The next clear memory I have is of sitting in the back of a police cruiser, a blanket around my shoulders, trying to explain to skeptical officers what I had seen. They found the house, eventually, but it was empty. No old men, no room full of photographs, No sign of Charlie. Just an abandoned cabin slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The official report chalked it up to hallucinations brought on by stress and the extreme weather conditions. Charlie was listed as missing, presumed dead in the blizzard. But I know what I saw. I know what was in that room. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howls outside my window, I think I can hear Charlie's voice calling for help. And I wonder, with a dread that chills me to my core, if somewhere out there, in a room full of death, there's a photograph of me with tomorrow's date. I don't work as a paramedic anymore. I can't bring myself to answer those late night calls, to drive down dark and lonely roads. But I keep a scanner in my room, always listening. And every time I hear about a call to a remote address and every time the storm winds pick up, I say a silent prayer for those brave souls heading out into the night. Because I know what's waiting for them in the darkness. And I know that sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones in the stories. They're the ones waiting behind closed doors, with smiles like knives and rooms full of stolen souls. The first message appeared on my phone at 2:17 a.m., jolting me from a fitful sleep. We know what you did last summer. I blinked at the screen, confusion giving way to a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't the words themselves that chilled me to the bone, but the fact that they were followed by a detailed itinerary of my business trip from the previous year. Information that should have been known only to me and my company's travel department. I'm Sarah Chen, a senior account executive for a multinational tech firm. My job involves frequent travel, staying in upscale hotels, and maintaining a polished, professional image. But in that moment, staring at my phone in the dark of my hotel room, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The Grandview Hotel had seemed like any other high-end establishment when I checked in earlier that evening. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff with plastered-on smiles, the usual trappings of luxury that had long since lost their luster for me. I had barely paid attention during check-in, my mind already on the big presentation I had scheduled for the next day. Now, as I sat up in bed, the opulence of the room felt oppressive. The heavy curtains, drawn against the city lights outside, seemed to press in on me. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, needing to dispel the shadows that suddenly seemed full of lurking threats. With shaking hands, I tried to trace the number that had sent the message, but it came up as unknown. I considered calling hotel security but hesitated. What would I say? That I'd received a creepy text? They'd probably dismiss it as a prank. As I debated what to do, another message flashed across my screen. Look outside your window. My heart leaped into my throat. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a sick joke. But my body moved of its own accord, drawn to the window like a moth to flame. With trembling fingers, I parted the curtains just enough to peer out. At first, I saw nothing but the glittering cityscape, 15 floors below. Then, movement caught my eye. In the building across the street, a figure stood at a window, directly facing my room. Even from this distance, I could see they were holding up a phone, its screen glowing in the darkness. I let the curtain fall back into place, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a digital breach. Someone was physically watching me. The reality of the situation crashed over me like a wave, leaving me gasping for air. I grabbed my laptop, desperate to find out how much of my personal information had been compromised. As soon as I opened it, I knew something was wrong. Files I didn't recognize cluttered the desktop, and my browser history showed searches I had never made. A notification popped up, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Your secrets are ours now." With a sense of impending doom, I opened the email. Attached were dozens of files, copies of my emails, photos from my phone, even scans of personal documents I kept in a locked drawer at home. The message itself was brief. "We own you, Sarah. Do exactly as we say, or everyone will know everything." Panic clawed at my throat. How had they gotten all this? My mind raced through possibilities. A hacked Wi-Fi network, a compromised company server, spyware on my devices. But the level of access they had went beyond simple digital theft. This felt personal, targeted. I needed help. But who could I trust? Calling the police seemed futile. By the time they arrived, any evidence could be erased. My company's IT department, they'd probably just lock me out of the system, seeing me as a security risk. I felt paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of ones and zeros. A soft knock at the door made me jump, a small scream escaping my lips. "Miss Chen?" A voice called. "This is hotel security. We've received some concerns about activity in your room. May we come in?" For a moment, relief flooded through me. Someone had noticed something was wrong. Help was here. But as I moved towards the door, my phone buzzed again. "Don't let them in. They're not who they say they are." I froze, my hand halfway to the door handle. How did they know someone was at my door? Were they watching me right now? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. "Ms. Chen," the voice called again, more insistent this time. "We need you to open the door." I pressed my eye to the peephole. Two men in hotel security uniforms stood outside, their faces impassive. Everything looked normal, but the warning on my phone made me hesitate. "I'm fine," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's no problem here." "Ma'am, we have reports of unauthorized access to the hotel's systems originating from your room. We need to investigate immediately." My blood ran cold. They knew about the hacking. But were they really here to help? Or were they part of whatever sick game was being played? I backed away from the door, my mind racing. "I'm calling my company's security team," I said, loud enough for them to hear. "They'll coordinate with you directly." There was a pause, then the sound of a key card being swiped. The lock disengaged with a click. Panic surged through me as I realized they were coming in whether I wanted them to or not. I grabbed my phone and laptop, ducking into the bathroom and locking the door just as I heard the room's main door open. Heart pounding. I turned on the shower to mask any noise and frantically typed a message to my company's emergency contact. "Help. Grandview Hotel. Room 1506. Security breach. Don't trust hotel staff." I hit send, praying it would reach someone who could help. Outside, I could hear the men moving around the room, their voices low and urgent. "She's not here." "Check the balcony. I'll take the bathroom." A heavy knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Miss Chen, we know you're in there. Please come out. We're here to help." I stayed silent, my eyes darting around the small space, looking for any means of escape. The tiny window was barely big enough to fit my arm through, let alone my whole body. I was trapped. The knocking became more insistent. "Ms. Chen, we're coming in. Stand back from the door." I heard the sound of a key card again, and realized with horror that even the bathroom lock wouldn't keep them out. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned off the lights and climbed into the bathtub, pulling the shower curtain closed. The door opened with a bang. Footsteps entered, pausing just inside. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. "Damn it," a voice muttered. Where the hell did she go? More footsteps, coming closer to the tub. I could see a shadow through the curtain, looming larger. A hand grasped the edge of the curtain, and I knew I was out of options. Just then, a commotion erupted from the main room. New voices, shouting orders. The man in the bathroom swore under his breath and rushed out. I stayed frozen in place, unsure what was happening. Had my message gotten through? Or was this just another part of the nightmare? "Ms. Chen," a new voice called out. "This is Agent Reeves with the FBI. You're safe now. You can come out." Cautiously, I peeked around the shower curtain. A woman in a dark suit stood in the doorway, her badge clearly visible. Behind her, I could see more agents securing the room. As I stepped out of the tub on shaky legs, the full impact of what had happened hit me. I had been targeted, my privacy invaded, my sense of security shattered. And for what? What did they want from me? Over the next few hours, as I answered questions and gave statements, the pieces began to fall into place. The hotel's systems had indeed been breached, but not by me. A sophisticated hacking group had been using the Grandview as a base of operations, targeting high-level executives and government officials who stayed there. I had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. My own devices compromised as soon as I connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. The security guards were part of the hacking team, sent to eliminate the evidence and me when they realized their operation had been discovered. As dawn broke over the city, I sat in the secure room at the local FBI office, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Agent Reeves sat across from me, her face sympathetic but professional. "Ms. Chen, I know this has been a traumatic experience," she said, "but I need you to understand this isn't over. The people behind this are still out there and they have your information. We'll do everything we can to protect you, but your life is going to change." I nodded numbly, the reality of the situation sinking in. My sense of privacy, of control over my own life had been shattered. How could I ever feel safe again, knowing that strangers had access to my most personal information? As I left the FBI office, stepping into a world that suddenly seemed full of hidden threats, I realized that the real horror wasn't the physical danger I had faced. It was the knowledge that in our hyper-connected world, our lives are more exposed than we ever realize. And sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in dark alleys. They're hiding in the shadows of the digital world, waiting to turn our own information against us. I checked into a new hotel that night, under an assumed name. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In the digital age, true privacy might just be an illusion, and none of us are as safe as we think we are. The mud squelched beneath our tires, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. As our car sank deeper into the mire, I could feel Lisa's eyes on me, silently asking the question we were both too afraid to voice aloud. What have we gotten ourselves into? It was supposed to be a simple shortcut, a way to shave an hour off our drive back to the city after a weekend getaway in the countryside. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and purple, I realized that our little detour had become something far more sinister. I'm Jack, and my girlfriend Lisa and I had been dating for about a year. We both worked high-stress jobs in finance, and this weekend trip was meant to be a chance to unwind, to reconnect away from the constant buzz of emails and phone calls. Now, as I stared at the mud-caked wheels of our sedan, I would have given anything to be back in my cramped office cubicle. "Maybe we should try rocking it back and forth," Lisa suggested, her voice tight with barely contained panic. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I put the car in reverse, then drive, then reverse again. The engine whined in protest, but we didn't move an inch. After 10 minutes of futile attempts, I slumped back in my seat, defeat washing over me. We were well and truly stuck. "I'll try calling for a tow truck," Lisa said, pulling out her phone. Her face fell almost immediately. No signal, of course. I peered out the windshield, trying to get my bearings. The dirt road we turned onto stretched out before us, disappearing into a thick forest. Behind us, it curved around a hill, obscuring the way we'd come. We hadn't passed any houses or signs of civilization for at least 20 minutes before getting stuck. "We can't stay here all night," I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "I guess I'll have to walk back, see if I can find help." Lisa's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "You can't go out there alone. We don't even know where we are." She was right, of course. The thought of wandering those dark woods alone sent a chill down my spine. But what choice did we have? Before I could respond, a flicker of light caught my eye. Headlights, coming around the bend behind us. Relief flooded through me. "See? Someone's coming. We'll be out of here in no time." But as the vehicle drew closer, that relief curdled into unease. It was an old pickup truck, its once white paint now a patchwork of rust and mud. It slowed as it approached, coming to a stop a few yards behind us. Two men got out, both wearing worn overalls and boots caked with mud. The driver, a tall, lanky man with a scraggly beard, approached my window. I rolled it down, trying to ignore the warning bells going off in my head. "You folks look like you could use some help," he said, his voice gravelly and thick with a local accent I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, we're stuck pretty good," I replied, forcing a smile. "Don't suppose you have a tow rope?" The man's companion, shorter and stockier but with the same unkempt appearance, let out a wheezing laugh. "Tow rope won't do you no good here, city boy. That there's Dawson's mud, like quicksand it is. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink." I glanced at Lisa, seeing my own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Something about these men set my teeth on edge, but they were the only help we were likely to find out here. "Is there a garage nearby?" I asked. "Or maybe we could use your phone to call for a tow truck." The tall man shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't no garages round here, and cell phones don't work in these parts. Too many hills, they say." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Tell you what, we can take you back to our place. Got a landline there, and my cousin Jeb's got a tractor. Might be able to pull you out come morning." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to refuse, to lock the doors and take our chances with the mud. But what choice did we have? We couldn't stay here all night, and wandering off into those woods would be suicide. I looked at Lisa, silently asking her opinion. She gave a small, hesitant nod. "That's very kind of you," I said, turning back to the man. "We'd really appreciate the help." His smile whitened, revealing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. "Ain't no trouble at all. We take care of our own round here." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. We grabbed our phones and wallets, locking the car behind us. As we approached the pickup, I noticed for the first time that it had no license plate, just another detail that made my skin crawl. The inside of the truck smelled of stale cigarettes and something else, something metallic and unpleasant that I couldn't quite identify. Lisa pressed close to me in the cramped back seat, her hand finding mine and squeezing tight. As we bumped along the dark road, the tall man, who introduced himself as Cletus, kept up a steady stream of chatter. He talked about the area, about how folks round here didn't take kindly to outsiders, about how easy it was to get lost in these woods and never be found. "Yep, these parts can be mighty dangerous if you don't know your way around," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "Good thing you ran into us, eh?" I mumbled an agreement, my mouth dry. Every turn of the road took us deeper into the wilderness, further from any hope of rescue. I tried to keep track of our route, but in the darkness, every tree looked the same. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we turned onto a narrow dirt track. The truck bounced and swayed, branches scraping against the windows. Finally, we emerged into a clearing. The house, if you could call it that, looked like something out of a horror movie. A ramshackle two-story affair, its paint peeling and shutters hanging askew. A few outbuildings lurked in the shadows, their purposes unclear. The whole scene was illuminated by a single bare bulb hanging over the porch, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. "Home sweet home," Cletus announced, killing the engine. As we got out of the truck, I noticed movement in one of the upstairs windows. A face peered out, pale and gaunt, before quickly disappearing behind a ragged curtain. Cletus must have noticed my gaze. "That's just Ma," he said. "Don't mind her. She ain't been right since Pa passed." He led us up the creaking porch steps, the boards groaning ominously beneath our feet. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a woman who could have been Cletus's twin, right down to the tobacco-stained teeth. "Well now, what have we here?" she drawled, her eyes raking over us with undisguised curiosity. "City folk got themselves stuck in Dawson's mud," Cletus explained. Thought we'd lend him a hand. The woman smiled and reached her eyes. How neighborly of you, brother. Come on in then. I'm sure our guests are parched after their ordeal. The interior of the house was no better than the outside. Peeling wallpaper, stained carpets, and an overwhelming smell of mildew and something else. Something that made my stomach churn. We were ushered into a cramped living room, the walls adorned with mounted animal heads in various states of decay. Lisa's grip on my hand tightened as we sat on a sagging couch, springs poking through the worn upholstery. I'll fetch some tea, the woman said, disappearing into what I assumed was the kitchen. Cletus and his companion, who still hadn't spoken a word, remained standing, looming over us like sentinels. The silence stretched on, broken only by the ticking of an ancient clock on the mantelpiece. So, about that phone, I began, but Cletus cut me off with a wave of his hand. All in good time, city boy. First, we gotta make sure you're the right kind of folk. A chill ran down my spine. The right kind of folk, I echoed. Cletus's smile widened, revealing more of those yellowed teeth. You see, we don't get many visitors around these parts. And when we do, well, let's just say we like to make sure they're compatible with our way of life. The woman returned, carrying a tray with 4 steaming mugs. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, and gave off an odor that made my eyes water. Drink up, she said, thrusting mugs into our hands. It's an old family recipe. Good for what ails you. I glanced at Lisa, seeing my own terror reflected in her eyes. We both knew, without a doubt, that whatever was in those mugs was not tea, and that if we drank it, our fate would be sealed. In that moment, as Cletus and his family watched us with hungry eyes, I realized the true horror of our situation. We weren't just lost in the backwoods. We had stumbled into a nightmare. One that had been carefully cultivated by generations of isolation and depravity. The clock ticked on, each second feeling like an eternity. I knew we had to act, had to find a way out of this. But surrounded by these people, in this house of horrors, any move felt like it could be our last. As I raised the mug to my lips, pretending to take a sip, my mind raced. How far were we from the main road? Could we outrun them in the dark? And even if we escaped this house, how would we ever find our way back to civilization? The tea's pungent aroma filled my nostrils, and I knew that our weekend getaway had turned into a fight for survival. In the depths of these dark woods, far from the comforts and safety of our normal lives, we were about to discover just how far we would go to stay alive. The binoculars felt unnaturally heavy in my hands as I watched a group of birdwatchers trudge through the protected meadow, their boots crushing delicate wildflowers with each step. Something about their movements, their furtive glances, set my teeth on edge. In my 10 years as a park ranger at Great Basin National Park, I'd seen my fair share of overzealous nature enthusiasts. But this was different. These people weren't here for the birds. I'm Ranger Mike Hawkins, and what started as a routine patrol would soon plunge me into a nightmare that would shake my faith in humanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd sworn to protect. The day had dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn morning that reminded me why I'd chosen this life, away from the chaos of the city. I'd set out at first light, my pack filled with supplies for a day of trail maintenance and wildlife observation. The ancient bristlecone pines, some older than civilization itself, stood sentinel as I made my way through the familiar paths. It was mid-morning when I first spotted the group, 6 of them, decked out in expensive outdoor gear, carrying an assortment of cameras and what looked like scientific equipment. Nothing unusual there. We often had researchers and serious birdwatchers in the park. But as I observed them from a distance, little details began to nag at me. Their birdwatching seemed haphazard at best. They'd stop randomly, huddle together in intense discussion, then move on with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with following bird calls. And the way they scanned the tree line, It was almost as if they were looking for something specific, something that definitely wasn't avian. Curiosity piqued. I decided to approach them. As I drew closer, their conversation became audible, and what I heard made me pause mid-step. "It has to be here somewhere," a tall man with wild graying hair was saying. "The ancient texts were clear. The nexus point is within this forest." "But we've been searching for days," a younger woman replied, frustration evident in her voice. "What if the texts were wrong? What if—" She cut off abruptly as they noticed my approach. In an instant, their demeanor changed. Forced smiles appeared, and the tall man stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Ah, Ranger, lovely morning, isn't it? We were just discussing the fascinating migratory patterns of the mountain bluebird. Have you seen any around lately?" The lie was smooth, practiced. I played along, making small talk about local wildlife while my mind raced. What were they really looking for? What ancient texts had led them here? As we chatted, I noticed other oddities. Their backpacks seemed unusually heavy for a day trip, and I caught glimpses of strange symbols etched onto their equipment. One woman kept fingering a pendant around her neck, a design I'd never seen before, all angles and swirls that hurt my eyes if I looked at it too long. I left them with a warning about staying on designated trails and protecting the delicate ecosystem. But as I walked away, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very, very wrong here. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on the group. They would venture out at dawn, return exhausted at dusk, only to pore over maps and ancient-looking books late into the night. I overheard fragments of conversations that made no sense, talk of ley lines, cosmic convergences, and something they called the awakening. Other rangers noticed nothing amiss, laughing off my concerns. Just some new age types communing with nature, as they'd say. But I couldn't shake the feeling that these people posed a threat, not just to the park, but to something bigger. On the fourth night, I decided to follow them. I told myself it was to ensure they weren't damaging protected areas, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to know what they were really up to. I trailed them silently through the darkness, grateful for my years of experience navigating these woods. They moved with purpose, no longer bothering with the pretense of birdwatching. After an hour of hiking, they reached a small clearing I'd never seen before. What happened next would haunt my dreams for years to come. The group formed a circle in the center of the clearing. The tall man, clearly their leader, began to chant in a language I'd never heard before. The others joined in, their voices rising in an eerie harmony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Suddenly, the ground at the center of their circle began to glow. A pale, sickly light seeped up from the earth, forming tendrils that wrapped around the chanters' legs. They showed no fear. If anything, their voices grew more fervent. I wanted to run, to radio for backup, to do anything but stand there watching. But I was rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey my panicked mind. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and the light erupted into a pillar that shot into the night sky. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something in that light. Shapes that didn't obey the laws of physics. Eyes that belonged to no earthly creature. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished, plunging the clearing into darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. As my eyes readjusted, I saw the group sprawled on the ground, apparently unconscious. I should have gone to check on them, to call for medical help. Instead, I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. I didn't stop until I reached my cabin, where I collapsed, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed. The next morning, I half convinced myself it had all been a nightmare. But when I went to check the clearing, I found evidence I couldn't ignore. The grass in the perfect circle was withered and black, as if burned by some intense heat. And at the center, half buried in the scorched earth, was a small object that made my blood run cold. a carved figurine of some creature that could not possibly exist in our world. I knew I had to report what I'd seen, but who would believe me? How could I explain the inexplicable without sounding like I'd lost my mind? As I stood there, wrestling with my decision, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around to find the group's leader standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with eyes that suddenly seemed too old, too knowing for a human face. "You saw, didn't you, Ranger?" he said, his voice carrying an undertone I couldn't quite place. "You witnessed the beginning." "The beginning of what?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry. His smile was both beatific and terrifying. "The awakening, of course. This world has slumbered for too long, ignorant of the greater realities that surround it. We are simply opening its eyes." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was insane. But the memory of that otherworldly light, of the shapes I'd glimpsed within it, stopped the words in my throat. "You have a choice to make, Ranger," he continued, taking a step closer. "You can try to stop us, futile as that would be, or you can join us. Help us usher in a new age of enlightenment." In that moment, I realized the true horror of the situation. It wasn't just about protecting the park anymore. These people, this awakening they spoke of, it threatened everything. The world as we knew it was in danger, and I was possibly the only one who knew. "I'll give you time to consider," the man said, turning to leave. "But not too much time. Events have been set in motion that cannot be undone. The choice is yours. Evolve with us, or be left behind in a world that will soon cease to exist as you know it." As he disappeared into the trees, I stood there, the weight of his words crushing down on me. I was just a park ranger, used to dealing with lost hikers and the occasional problem bear. How could I possibly hope to stop whatever madness these people had unleashed? But as I looked around at the ancient forest, at the mountains that had stood watch for millennia, I knew I had to try. This land, this world, was under my protection, and I would defend it, no matter the cost. I pulled out my radio, hesitating for just a moment before making the call that would change everything. "Base, this is Ranger Hawkins. We have a situation. I need to speak with the park superintendent and possibly federal authorities. It's about a threat to national security." As I waited for a response, my eyes were drawn back to the scorched circle. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw that sickly light flickering just beneath the surface of the earth, pulsing like a heartbeat. The forest suddenly felt alien, hostile. The awakening had begun, and I was the only one who knew. The only one who could stop it. God help us all. The first time I heard the voice crackling through the static, I thought I was losing my mind. It was 2:17 a.m., and I was alone in the radio station, queuing up another late-night track when suddenly, the music cut out. In its place, a raspy whisper filled the airwaves. "The bodies are buried beneath the old Carson place." I froze, my hand hovering over the control panel, as the voice continued. "You're the only one who can uncover the truth, Sarah. Don't let them silence you." "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm the night DJ at WBRK, a small-town radio station in the heart of Millbrook. Population 5,342. Or at least, that's what I thought I was. Little did I know that one cryptic message would plunge me into a world of long-buried secrets, turning my quiet life into a nightmare of conspiracy and danger. At first, I convinced myself it was just a prank. Some bored teenagers had probably hijacked our frequency for a laugh. But as the nights wore on, the messages kept coming, each one more detailed and disturbing than the last. They spoke of corrupt officials, of deals made in the shadows, of innocents who had disappeared over the years. I tried to ignore them, to focus on my job of playing music and reading weather reports. But the voice was persistent, and worse, it knew things about me. Personal things I'd never shared on air. It called me by name, mentioned my childhood dog, even described the birthmark on my left shoulder. After a week of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I confided in my boss, station manager Tom Grayson. I expected him to be concerned, to call in tech support or maybe even the police. Instead, his face went pale, and he laughed it off with a forced casualness that set alarm bells ringing in my head. Probably just some interference from a CB radio, he said, not meeting my eyes. I'll have someone look into it. In the meantime, maybe you should take a few days off. You look tired, Sarah. I didn't take the days off. Instead, I started digging. The voice had mentioned the Carson place, an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for decades. On my next day off, I drove out there, telling myself I was crazy for following the lead of some disembodied voice. The Carson place was exactly as I remembered it from childhood dares and ghost stories. A dilapidated 2-story farmhouse, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. As I stood there, staring at the overgrown yard, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd, fresh tire tracks leading around to the back of the house. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't used the old driveway. Heart pounding, I followed the tracks. They led to a patch of ground behind the barn that looked recently disturbed. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I started to dig with my bare hands. I had barely broken the surface when a voice behind me made me jump out of my skin. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Mitchell. I whirled around to find Sheriff Dawson standing there, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. I had known Earl Dawson my whole life. He'd been sheriff since before I was born. But in that moment, looking into his cold eyes, I felt like I was seeing him for the first time. Just, looking for my dog, I stammered, knowing how ridiculous it sounded even as the words left my mouth. I thought I saw him run back here. The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. Funny, I didn't know you had a dog. Why don't you come on down to the station with me? We need to have a little chat about trespassing and other things. I knew in that moment that if I got into his car, I might never be seen again. So I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the overgrown fields, branches whipping my face. I could hear the sheriff shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. Somehow, I made it to my car and peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw the sheriff emerge from the fields, talking urgently into his radio. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind reeling. What had I stumbled into? What was buried on that farm, and who was trying to tell me about it? When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled into a rest area and tried to think. I couldn't go home. That would be the first place they'd look. I couldn't go to the police if the sheriff was involved. Who knew how deep this went? As if in answer to my silent questions, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Booth 3 at Denny's. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers. Every instinct told me not to go. That this was how people ended up dead in ditches. But I was in too deep now. I needed to know the truth. An hour later, I sat in a vinyl booth at Denny's, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying not to look as terrified as I felt. The door chimed, and an old man shuffled in. He looked like any other retiree you'd see in a small town. But when his eyes met mine, I knew he was the one I was waiting for. He slid into the booth across from me without a word, his roomy eyes darting around the nearly empty restaurant. "You're the voice on the radio," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, a sad smile creasing his weathered face. "Name's Frank. I used to work for the station back in the 70s. Before, everything changed." Over the next hour, Frank unraveled a tale so outlandish I would have laughed if I hadn't seen the deadly seriousness in his eyes. He spoke of a town built on secrets, of a cabal of powerful men who had been running things from the shadows for decades. The radio station, he said, was at the heart of it all. "WBRK isn't just a radio station," Frank explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a cover. The real signal, the one that matters, is broadcast on a frequency nobody's supposed to know about. They use it to communicate, to coordinate their activities." "What activities?" I asked, dreading the answer. Frank's eyes grew distant. Bad things, Sarah. Things that would make your skin crawl. People who asked too many questions, who threatened to expose the truth. They had a way of disappearing. And the Carson place, that's where they ended up. I felt sick. But why tell me? Why now? Because you're different, Frank said, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. You've got the gift. You can hear the real signal, the one they think is secure. That's why I've been reaching out to you. You're our only hope of exposing them, of ending this once and for all. Before I could ask any more questions, Frank stiffened, his eyes focused on something over my shoulder, and his face drained of color. They're here, he hissed. Run. Don't trust anyone. And whatever you do, don't stop broadcasting. With surprising agility for a man his age, Frank slid out of the booth and hurried towards the back of the restaurant. I turned to see what had spooked him and saw Tom Grayson, my boss, entering the Denny's with two men I didn't recognize. Their eyes locked onto me, and I knew with chilling certainty that they weren't here for the Grand Slam breakfast. I slipped out the side door, my mind racing. Frank's words echoed in my head. Don't stop broadcasting. But how? They would be watching the station. Then it hit me, the old pirate radio set up in my garage, a relic from my rebellious teenage years. As I drove home, taking a circuitous route to shake any tails, I formulated a plan. I would use the pirate radio to broadcast everything I knew, to blow this whole conspiracy wide open. It was probably suicide, but I couldn't stay silent, not anymore. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever of activity, gathering evidence, recording my story, and preparing for the broadcast that would change everything. I slept in short bursts, jumping at every sound, half expecting to see shadowy figures breaking down my door. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, I was ready. With shaking hands, I powered up the old transmitter. Static filled the air, and then my voice crackled through the speakers. This is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm here to tell you the truth about Millbrook. Everything you thought you knew is a lie. I spoke for hours, laying out every detail Frank had told me, every scrap of evidence I'd uncovered. I named names, exposed decades of corruption and violence. As I talked, I could almost feel the town waking up, the truth spreading like wildfire. I was so focused on my broadcast that I almost missed the sound of approaching sirens. They were coming for me. The men behind the conspiracy, their facades of respectability stripped away by my words, but it was too late for them to stop it. The truth was out there now, spreading across the airwaves, impossible to contain. As I heard the screech of tires in my driveway, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Whatever happened next, Millbrook would never be the same. The dark secrets hidden beneath its quaint small-town exterior had been dragged into the light. And me, I was just the messenger, the unlikely hero who had given voice to the whispers and the static. The door burst open, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. But I kept talking, my voice steady now. Because in that moment, I wasn't just Sarah Mitchell, small-town DJ. I was the voice of truth, the breaker of silence, and no matter what they did to me, that voice would never be silenced again. The flames danced hypnotically, casting long shadows across the beach. We laughed and shared stories, our voices mingling with the crash of waves. It was supposed to be the perfect end to a perfect summer. None of us could have imagined that beyond the circle of firelight, hidden in the dunes, a sinister plot was unfolding. One that would shatter our innocence and plunge us into a nightmare we never saw coming. I'm Jake, and this is the story of how a simple beach bonfire turned into a night of terror that would haunt us for years to come. There were 5 of us gathered around the fire that night. Me, my girlfriend Amber, our best friends Mike and Sarah's younger brother Tim. We'd all grown up together in the sleepy coastal town. And now, on the cusp of leaving for college. We wanted one last hurrah before life scattered us to the winds. The night started innocently enough. We roasted marshmallows, shared beers smuggled from our parents' fridges, and reminisced about childhood adventures. The mood was bittersweet. Excitement for the future tinged with nostalgia for the past we were leaving behind. It was around midnight when things took a turn. Tim, always the restless one, decided to go for a walk along the shoreline. We barely noticed him leave, caught up in our own conversations, but when he came running back 15 minutes later, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, we knew something was wrong. "Guys," he gasped out of breath. "You have to come see this. There are people in the dunes. They're doing something weird." We exchanged glances, unsure whether to take him seriously. Tim had a reputation for pranks and wild stories, but there was something in his voice, a tremor of genuine fear, that made us pause. "What kind of weird?" Mike asked, always the skeptic. Tim shook his head. "I don't know, man. They were all dressed in black, huddled together. I think I saw weapons. It looked like they were planning something." A chill ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. I could see the others felt it too. That sudden shift from carefree summer night to something darker, more dangerous. "We should check it out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If there's really something going on, we need to know." Amber grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Are you crazy? What if they're dangerous? We should call the police." I hesitated. She had a point, but something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some misguided sense of bravado. "Let's just take a quick look," I suggested. "If it seems serious, we'll call the cops. But it could be nothing. Maybe just some other kids having their own party." Reluctantly, the others agreed. We doused our fire and followed Tim into the dunes, our phone flashlights cutting weak beams through the darkness. The sand shifted treacherously under our feet, and the wind carried whispers that might have been voices, or just our imagination playing tricks on us. We crested a large dune, and Tim motioned for us to get down. Crawling on our stomachs, we peered over the top. What I saw in the hollow below made my blood run cold. There were about a dozen people gathered in a tight circle. They wore dark clothes, their faces obscured by hoods or masks. In the center of the circle, illuminated by a single lantern, was a table covered with maps and what looked like blueprints. "Holy shit," Mike whispered beside me. "Are those guns?" I squinted, my heart pounding. He was right. Several of the figures had holstered weapons at their hips. This wasn't some harmless gathering. Whatever we had stumbled upon, it was deadly serious. One man seemed to be in charge. He was taller than the others, with an air of authority that was palpable even from a distance. As we watched, he pointed to different spots on the map, his voice carrying faintly on the wind. "The shipment arrives at midnight tomorrow. Team A will secure the docks. Team B..." I couldn't make out the rest, but it was enough. This was big. Some kind of organized crime, maybe even terrorism. We needed to get out of there, to call the authorities. But as I turned to signal to the others, my elbow dislodged a small avalanche of sand. The noise wasn't loud, but in the tense silence it might as well have been a gunshot. The figures below froze, then as one turned to look in our direction. "Run!" I hissed, scrambling backwards. We tumbled down the dune, sand filling our shoes and clothes. I could hear shouts behind us, then the unmistakable sound of pursuit. Panic gave us speed, and we sprinted across the beach towards the distant lights of town. But they were faster, more organized. As we reached the edge of the beach, dark figures materialized out of the night, cutting off our escape. We skidded to a stop, gasping for breath, as the group from the dunes caught up. The tall man stepped forward, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "What do we have here?" Some nosy kids out past their bedtime. I stepped in front of the others, trying to shield them. We didn't see anything, I said, hating the tremor in my voice. We were just out for a walk. Please, let us go. The man chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. I'm afraid it's not that simple. You've wandered into something much bigger than you can imagine. Something that's been in motion for years. He gestured, and two of his men grabbed Tim, who let out a yelp of fear. Amber screamed, and I lunged forward. But strong hands held me back. Let him go, Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. He's just a kid. The leader ignored her, his attention focused solely on me. You have a choice to make, young man. A choice that will determine not just your fate, but the fate of your friends in this entire town. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. What are you talking about? Who are you people? He pulled back his hood, revealing a face I recognized with a jolt of shock. It was Mayor Callahan, the man who had handed me my high school diploma just 2 months ago. We are the guardians of this town, he said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. For generations, we have protected Sandpoint from the outside world, ensuring our way of life continues undisturbed. What you witnessed tonight is just a small part of what we do to keep this community safe and prosperous. I shook my head, unable to process what I was hearing. Safe? You're talking about illegal shipments, about weapons. How is that keeping anyone safe? Mayor Callahan, or whoever he really was, smiled sadly. The world is a complex place, Jake. Sometimes to preserve something good, we must do things that might seem questionable to those who don't understand the bigger picture. He stepped closer, his eyes boring into mine. You're a smart young man. I've watched you grow up. I think you have the potential to be a part of this, to help us protect everything you love. A chill ran through me as I realized what he was offering. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. Then I'm afraid we can't let you leave. Any of you. The safety of our operation, of our entire community, must be preserved at all costs. Time seemed to stand still as the weight of the decision crashed down on me. On one side, the promise of power, of being part of something bigger than myself. On the other, the knowledge that to accept would mean betraying everything I believed in. Everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. I looked at my friends, at Amber's tear-stained face, at Mike's clenched fists, at Sarah holding her terrified brother. I thought of our families, of the town we'd grown up in, now revealed to be built on lies and corruption. In that moment, I knew there was only one choice I could live with. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever you're involved in, whatever you think you're protecting, it's wrong. We won't be a part of it, and we won't stay silent. Mayor Callahan's face darkened. I'm disappointed, Jake. I had high hopes for you. He raised his hand, and I tensed, expecting the worst. But before he could give whatever signal he intended, a new sound cut through the night. Police sirens, growing louder by the second. Confusion rippled through the group. Boss, I thought we had the cops under control, one of the men said, panic edging his voice. Mayor Callahan's composure cracked for the first time. We do, he snarled. Then his eyes locked onto Tim, who was fumbling with something in his pocket. The boy, check his phone, but it was too late. As the first police cars came into view, their lights painting the beach in red and blue, I realized what had happened. Tim, in a moment of quick thinking, had managed to call 911 while we were all distracted. What followed was chaos. Mayor Callahan and his men scattered, disappearing into the dunes with a speed that spoke of long practice. We were left standing there, shell-shocked and trembling, as police officers swarmed the beach. The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, and disbelief. We told our story over and over, to increasingly higher-ranking officials. By dawn, the FBI had arrived, and our sleepy coastal town was the center of a federal investigation. In the days and weeks that followed, the full extent of the conspiracy was revealed. Mayor Callahan and his guardians had been running a sophisticated smuggling operation for decades, using the town's isolated position to their advantage. The roots of corruption ran deep, implicating businessmen, cops, even some of our teachers. As for us, we were hailed as heroes by some, branded as traitors by others. The town was torn apart by the revelations, and nothing would ever be the same. Our plans for college were put on hold as we dealt with the aftermath, the endless interviews and depositions. But through it all, we had each other. That night on the beach had forged a bond between us that nothing could break. We had faced the darkness together and emerged on the other side, forever changed but unbroken. As I sit here now, years later, I often think back to that moment of choice on the beach. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had made a different decision. If I had been seduced by the promise of power and secret knowledge. But then I look at my friends, at the life we built in the wake of that night, and I know I made the right choice. We may have lost our innocence, but we gained something far more valuable. The knowledge that even in the darkest of times, there are those who will stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. The bonfire that was meant to mark the end of our childhood became the crucible in which our true selves were forged, and though the flames have long since gone out, the light of that night continues to guide us, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures and the greatest dangers are found not in distant lands, but in the hidden corners of the places we call home. The first words I heard him speak sent a chill down my spine, not because of what he said, but how he said it. His voice seemed to reach into the deepest recesses of my mind, tugging at thoughts and emotions I didn't even know I had. "My children," he intoned, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. "You have come seeking redemption, but are you prepared for the price it demands?" I hadn't meant to be there that day. I'm Alex, a freelance photographer who'd come to these woods to capture the autumn colors. But as I hiked deeper into the forest, the sound of voices drew me off the trail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself peering through the undergrowth at a scene that would haunt me for years to come. In a small clearing stood a man unlike any I'd ever seen, tall and lean, with long gray hair and a beard that seemed to flow like water. He was dressed in simple robes that somehow made him look both ancient and timeless. Around him, a group of maybe 30 people sat in rapt attention, their eyes never leaving his face. I should have left right then, should have turned around and hiked back to my car, forgetting everything I'd seen. But something held me there, rooted to the spot. Maybe it was the photographer in me, sensing a story. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't yet name. The man, the preacher, I assumed, began to speak again. His words weaving a tapestry of sin and salvation, of a world teetering on the brink of destruction, and the chosen few who would survive the coming storm. It should have sounded crazy, the ramblings of yet another doomsday prophet. But there was a power in his voice, a conviction that made even the most outlandish claims seem not just possible, but inevitable. "Each of you carries a darkness within," he said, his eyes seeming to lock with each person in turn. "A sin so deep, so terrible, that you've hidden it even from yourselves. But I see it, and I can free you from it, if you have the courage to face the truth." A woman in the front row began to sob, her whole body shaking. The preacher moved to her, placing a hand on her head. "Tell us, child. Speak your sin and be unburdened." What came next was like watching a dam break. The woman poured out a confession of such raw pain and guilt that I felt like a voyeur just for hearing it. And she wasn't alone. One by one, people began to speak, revealing secrets and shames that should never have seen the light of day. I watched, horrified and fascinated, as the preacher moved among them. With each confession, he would nod solemnly, sometimes offering words of comfort, Other times prescribing bizarre penances. You must fast for 7 days and nights, mind you told one man. To another, you will walk barefoot through the forest until your feet bleed and then keep walking. It was madness. Dangerous, manipulative madness. I knew I should do something. Call the police. Try to intervene. But every time I thought about moving, the preacher's eyes would flick in my direction, as if he knew exactly where I was hiding. And each time, that same chill would run through me, freezing me in place. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, the atmosphere in the clearing changed. The confessions were over, but the air thrummed with a palpable energy. The preacher raised his arms, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "You have laid bare your souls," he thundered. "Now, it is time to be reborn in the cleansing fire of truth." From somewhere, he produced a cup. It gleamed dully in the fading light, and even from my hiding spot, I could see an oily liquid inside. My heart began to race. This was no longer just a fringe religious gathering. This was something far more sinister. "Drink," the preacher commanded, "and let the veil be lifted from your eyes. See the world as it truly is, and your place within it." I wanted to shout, to warn them, to do anything to stop what was about to happen. But before I could move, the cup was already making its way through the group. One by one, they drank, their faces contorting in disgust at the taste. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, chaos erupted. Some fell to the ground, writhing and screaming. Others began to laugh hysterically, tears streaming down their faces. A man near the back of the group started clawing at his own skin, as if trying to tear it off. And through it all, the preacher stood, arms outstretched, a look of rapturous joy on his face. "Yes," he cried, "feel the truth burning through you. Let it scour away your lies, your doubts, your very sense of self." I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. I stood up, ready to charge into the clearing, though I had no idea what I could actually do against this madness. But as I took my first step, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, heart pounding, to find myself face to face with a woman I hadn't noticed before. She was older, with steel gray hair, and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It isn't safe." "We have to help them," I said, gesturing toward the clearing where the chaos continued unabated. "We have to stop this." The woman shook her head sadly. "You can't stop it. Not now. It's already too late for them." She tugged at my arm. "Come. We need to leave before he notices us." I wanted to resist, to argue. But something in her tone brooked no argument. I let her lead me away from the clearing, casting one last glance over my shoulder at the nightmare I was leaving behind. As we hiked through the gathering darkness, the woman introduced herself as Margaret. She had been part of the preacher's group once, she explained, but had managed to break free. "He calls himself Elijah," she said, disgust evident in her voice. "Claims to be a prophet, here to prepare the way for the end times, but he's no holy man. He's a monster." I listened in horror as Margaret detailed Elijah's methods, how he used a combination of manipulation, drugs, and what she could only describe as some kind of hypnosis to break down people's mental defenses. "He finds the cracks in your psyche," she said, "the doubts and fears and secret shames, and then he widens them until your whole sense of self comes crumbling down. Once that happens, he can reshape you into whatever he wants." "But why?" I asked. "What's the point of all this?" Margaret's face darkened. "Power," she said simply. "Control. He truly believes he's building an army for the apocalypse, but really, he just wants to play God." We reached my car just as true night was falling. I offered Margaret a ride, but she declined. "I have my own vehicle hidden nearby," she said. "It's safer if we separate." Before she left, she gripped my arm tightly. "Listen to me. she said, her eyes boring into mine. You need to be careful. Elijah, he has a way of getting into your head. Even now, you might feel drawn to go back, to hear more of what he has to say. You have to resist that urge. Promise me you'll leave here and never come back. I nodded, though even as I did, I felt a small voice in the back of my mind whispering that maybe, just maybe, I should return to the clearing. Just to check, to make sure everyone was okay. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Margaret seemed to sense my inner conflict. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone. Here, she said, pressing it into my hand. When you feel the urge to go back, hold this. It will help ground you, remind you of what's real. I took the stone, feeling slightly foolish but grateful nonetheless. As Margaret disappeared into the darkness, I climbed into my car and started the engine, eager to put as much distance between myself and this forest as possible. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the memory of Elijah's voice, of the power in his words. I found myself turning the stone over and over in my hand, clinging to it like a lifeline. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen was some kind of mass hysteria, a shared delusion brought on by suggestibility and group dynamics. I even considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd stumbled upon a cult in the woods, that their leader might have supernatural powers of persuasion. They'd laugh me out of the station. But worse than the memories of what I'd seen were the dreams that began to plague me. Night after night, I found myself back in that clearing, listening to Elijah's sermon. Only in the dreams, I wasn't hiding in the bushes. I was sitting with the others, hanging on his every word, feeling a sense of belonging and purpose I'd never known in my waking life. I'd wake from these dreams in a cold sweat, my hand automatically reaching for the stone Margaret had given me. But each time, the urge to return to the forest grew stronger. A week after my encounter in the woods, I found myself driving back towards the area, the stone clutched tightly in my fist. I told myself I was just going to take some pictures, to prove to myself that it had all been some kind of hallucination. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was answering a call I couldn't ignore, drawn by a force I didn't understand. As I parked my car and stepped out into the crisp autumn air, I realized the true horror of what I'd stumbled upon that day in the forest. It wasn't just the scene I'd witnessed, as terrible as it was. The real nightmare was the seed Elijah had planted in my mind. A seed that was now taking root, threatening to consume everything I thought I knew about myself. I stood at the trailhead, the stone in one hand, my camera in the other, torn between two competing impulses. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of a familiar voice, I knew that my real trial was only just beginning. The first note was innocuous enough, a yellow post-it stuck to my computer monitor with a simple message. Your coffee order, large Americano, 2 sugars. I brushed it off as a kind gesture from a coworker. Maybe the new intern trying to make a good impression. It wasn't until the third note appeared, listing my home address and the color of my bedroom curtains, that the icy fingers of fear began to creep up my spine. My name is Emily Chen, and I've worked at Grace & Associates for 5 years as a marketing analyst. It's a typical office job. Cubicles, water cooler gossip, the rhythmic hum of photocopiers providing the soundtrack to our 9-to-5 lives. I've always been the quiet one, head down, work hard, go home. I never imagined I'd become the center of a mystery that would turn my mundane life into a waking nightmare. The notes kept coming, appearing on my desk, slipped into my purse, even tucked under my windshield wiper in the parking garage. Each one revealed a piece of information about me that became progressively more personal, more invasive. My favorite book, the name of my first pet, the date of my last gynecologist appointment. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, albeit a cruel one. But as the weeks wore on and the notes became more frequent, more detailed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I entered the office, I felt eyes on me. Casual conversations with coworkers became minefields. Was that a normal question, or were they fishing for information? I started changing up my routine. I'd take different routes to work, vary the times I went to lunch. I even bought new clothes, as if I could somehow shed the skin of the person being stalked. But still, the notes came. You looked lovely in that blue blouse yesterday. It brings out your eyes. I bet that tuna sandwich from the deli on 4th was delicious. You always did love their secret sauce. It was the little details that terrified me most. Whoever was doing this wasn't just following me or watching me at work. They knew things about my past, about my private life that no casual observer could know. I debated going to HR. But what would I say? I had no proof that this wasn't just some elaborate office joke gone too far. And a part of me feared that drawing attention to it might only encourage my stalker. So I suffered in silence, jumping at every unexpected sound, scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. My work began to suffer. Dark circles formed under my eyes from sleepless nights spent wondering who among my coworkers harbored this obsession. Was it Tim from accounting, who always lingered a little too long by my desk? Or maybe Sarah, the receptionist whose smile never quite reached her eyes? Could it be Mr. Grayson himself, the rarely seen CEO who I'd caught staring at me during last year's Christmas party? The paranoia was eating me alive. I started seeing clues everywhere. The way Jerry from IT angled his monitor. Was he watching me through the security cameras? The fact that Melissa always seemed to be in the break room at the same time as me. Coincidence or careful planning? Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the game changed. I arrived at work one Monday to find not a note, but a small box on my desk. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single rose and a card that read, "I've waited long enough. Meet me on the roof at midnight if you want answers. Come alone, or everyone will know your darkest secret." My blood ran cold. What secret could they possibly know? My mind raced through every mistake, every embarrassing moment, every hidden shame. Nothing seemed big enough to warrant this level of threat. But the not knowing was almost worse than any revelation could be. I spent the day in a fog, barely able to focus on my work. My coworkers must have noticed something was off, but by this point, I'd become so withdrawn that no one dared to ask. As the hours ticked by, I wrestled with my decision. Should I go to the police, ignore the demand and risk exposure, or face my tormentor and finally put an end to this nightmare? In the end, curiosity and desperation won out. At 11:45 p.m., I found myself climbing the stairs to the roof, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I clutched my phone in one hand, 911 pre-dialed, and a small canister of pepper spray in the other. The night air was cool on my face as I pushed open the heavy metal door. The roof was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city and a waxing moon. For a moment, I thought I was alone. Then, a figure stepped out from behind an air conditioning unit. "Hello, Emily," said a voice I recognized instantly. My breath caught in my throat as Mark from Human Resources stepped into the moonlight. Mark, with his easy smile and helpful demeanor. Mark, who I confided in just last year about my struggle with depression. Mark, who had access to all of our personal files. Why? I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it wasn't the warm grin I was used to. This smile was cold, predatory. "Because I could," he said simply. "Do you have any idea how easy it is to manipulate people when you know everything about them? Their fears, their desires, their weaknesses." As he spoke, he moved closer. I backed away, my grip tightening on the pepper spray. "Stay back," I warned, but my voice shook. Mark laughed. "Or what? You'll spray me. Scream? Go ahead. By the time anyone gets up here, I'll be gone. And tomorrow, everyone in the office will receive an email detailing your history of mental health issues. How long do you think you'll keep your job once people know you're unstable? I felt like I was going to be sick. What do you want from me? His eyes gleamed in the darkness. I want you to understand your place, Emily. Knowledge is power, and I hold all the knowledge here. You're going to do exactly as I say from now on. And if you don't... He let the threat hang in the air. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the paranoia of the past weeks crystallized into a white-hot rage. Without thinking, I lunged forward, pepper spray forgotten as my fist connected with Mark's smug face. He stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. But it was enough. I ran for the door, fumbling with my phone as I fled down the stairs. This time I didn't hesitate to hit dial. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and HR interviews. As it turned out, Mark had been running his little game on multiple employees, using the personal information in their files to manipulate and control them. The company's security was woefully inadequate, allowing him to access data he should never have been able to see. In the end, Mark was arrested, charged with stalking, harassment, and a host of cybercrime offenses. The company, desperate to avoid a lawsuit, offered me a generous settlement and a transfer to any branch I wanted. But as I sat in my apartment that night, the adrenaline finally wearing off, I realized that no amount of money could erase the trauma of the past weeks. The feeling of violation, of having my privacy so thoroughly invaded, would stay with me for a long time. I also knew that this wasn't really the end. In our digital age, our personal information is out there, vulnerable to anyone with the skills and lack of ethics to exploit it. Mark was caught, but how many others like him were out there, using our secrets against us? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. In a world where our lives are increasingly lived online, where every click and purchase and search query is recorded and stored, is true privacy even possible anymore? Or are we all just one determined stalker away from having our worst fears exposed? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that from now on, I would guard my personal information like the precious resource it is. Because in the end, our secrets are all we truly own, and there will always be someone out there trying to steal them. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot and I froze. In the oppressive silence of the old house, that small sound seemed to echo like a gunshot. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign that the noise had been noticed. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Nothing but the faint whisper of wind through ancient walls. I exhaled slowly, but the knot of fear in my stomach only tightened, because in that moment of stillness, I realized a chilling truth. I wasn't alone in this house, and whatever was down there in the darkness was listening for me just as intently as I was listening for it. My name is Zoe, and what was supposed to be a romantic getaway in a quaint New Orleans Airbnb had turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. It had started innocently enough. My boyfriend, Jakin, and I were celebrating our 2nd anniversary with a week in the Big Easy. We'd splurged on this place, a restored 19th century townhouse in the heart of the French Quarter. The listing had boasted of original features and authentic New Orleans charm. If only we'd known just how authentic that charm would turn out to be. The first couple of days were everything we'd hoped for. We explored the city, ate our weight in beignets, and soaked in the intoxicating atmosphere of jazz and history that seemed to pulse through every cobblestone street. But on the 3rd night, things took a turn. We'd come back late from a ghost tour, our heads filled with tales of voodoo queens and restless spirits. Maybe that's why, when I first heard the scratching sound coming from behind the living room bookcase, I brushed it off as an overactive imagination. But Jake heard it too. Probably just rats, he said with a nervous laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. This place is old after all. I nodded, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. We went to bed, but sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified in the darkness. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard it, a thump so distinct, so deliberate, that there was no writing it off as old pipes or settling foundations. It came from downstairs, and it sounded for all the world like a door closing. I shook Jake awake, my heart pounding. "There's someone in the house," I whispered. He sat up, instantly alert. "Stay here," he said, reaching for his phone. "I'll go check it out." "No." I grabbed his arm. "We should call the police." But Jake, ever the rational one, insisted on investigating first. "It's probably nothing," he said. "No need to bother the cops if it's just our imaginations running wild." I watched him leave the bedroom, my every nerve on edge. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. When he didn't return after 10 minutes, I knew something was wrong. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I crept out of bed and toward the stairs. The house was eerily silent now. Not even the usual creaks and groans of old wood to keep me company. "Jake?" I called softly. No response. I made my way down the stairs, wincing at every small noise. The living room was empty, bathed in the sickly glow of a streetlight filtering through lace curtains. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. That's when I noticed the bookcase. It stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible behind it. With trembling hands, I pulled it open further, revealing a hidden door. It hung open, leading into inky blackness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. But Jake was down there. I couldn't leave him. Taking a deep breath, I stepped through the doorway. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and unsettling. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, casting monstrous shadows on rough stone walls. I found myself in a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally with a sound that made me jump every time. This was no basement. It was some kind of tunnel system. "Jake?" I called again, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. I don't know how long I walked, time seeming to warp in the windowless passageway. Just as I was about to turn back, convinced I'd made a horrible mistake, I saw a light ahead. The tunnel opened into a large chamber, dimly lit by flickering candles. What I saw there stopped me dead in my tracks, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, overlapping and haphazardly pinned up. But these weren't family snapshots or vacation memories. These were surveillance photos, people caught unaware on the streets of the French Quarter, in restaurants, entering and leaving buildings. And with a jolt of horror, I recognized Jake and myself in several of them. Photos taken over the past 3 days, documenting our every move. In the center of the room stood a table, covered in maps and documents. I approached cautiously, my morbid curiosity overriding my fear for a moment. The papers were covered in strange symbols and diagrams, annotated in a spidery handwriting that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "Magnificent, isn't it?" The voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. I whirled around to see an old man standing in the tunnel entrance. He was tall and rail-thin, with wild white hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Where's Jake?" I demanded, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through me. The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be natural. "Your friend is fine, my dear. He's simply indisposed at the moment. But don't worry, you'll be joining him soon enough." He took a step forward, and I backed away, bumping into the table. "What is this place? Who are you?" "This," he said, gesturing grandly around the room, "is the true heart of New Orleans. The beating pulse of magic and mystery that's kept this city alive for centuries. And I am its caretaker." He moved closer, and I noticed for the first time that he was holding something. A small, ornate box that seemed to vibrate slightly in his grasp. Every city has its secrets, he continued, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. But New Orleans, our secrets have secrets, layers upon layers of history and power, all pulsing just beneath the surface. And every now and then that power needs refreshing. My back hit the wall, photographs crinkling behind me. There was nowhere left to run. "What do you want from us?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The old man's smile widened. "Nothing much, my dear. Just a small contribution. A drop of life force to keep the wheels turning, to ensure the magic never fades. Your boyfriend has already made his donation. Now it's your turn." He opened the box and a sickly green light spilled out, illuminating his face in a way that made him look more corpse than man. I felt a pull, an urge to reach out and touch whatever was inside. With horror, I realized my hand was moving of its own accord. In that moment of terror, my fingers brushed against something cold and metal pinned to the wall behind me. A key. Without thinking, I grabbed it and swung blindly at the old man's face. He reeled back with a howl of pain and rage. The box clattered to the floor, its lid slamming shut. Whatever spell had been working on me broke. And I ran. I tore through the tunnels, no longer caring about silence. My only thought to get back to the surface, to find Jake, to escape this nightmare. Behind me, I could hear the old man's shrieks echoing off the stone walls. I burst out of the hidden door, into the relative normalcy of the Airbnb's living room. Jake was there, slumped on the couch, pale but breathing. I shook him awake, dragging him to his feet. "We have to go," I gasped. "Now." We fled into the night, not stopping until we were several blocks away. Only then, under the harsh glare of a streetlight, did I allow myself to really look at Jake. He seemed dazed, confused, with no memory of what had happened after he went downstairs. We went straight to the police but of course they found nothing. The hidden door was gone, the bookcase just a bookcase. There was no trace of the tunnels, the photographs, or the old man. We cut our trip short and flew home the next day, both of us too shaken to enjoy another moment in New Orleans. In the weeks and months that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, a bad trip caused by tainted alcohol, or the power of suggestion from that ghost tour. But deep down, I knew the truth. I still have nightmares about that green light, about the pull I felt toward that box. And sometimes, when I look at Jake, I catch a glimpse of something in his eyes, a vacancy, a flicker of something missing. In those moments, I wonder just what kind of donation he made in those tunnels, and what part of him was left behind in the dark heart of New Orleans. We never talked about that night again, but its shadow looms over us. We learned the hard way that some Airbnbs offer more than just a quaint place to stay. Some offer a glimpse into the hidden worlds that exist just beyond the veil of normalcy. Worlds that, once seen, can never be unseen. The bass pulsed through my body, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. Neon lights flashed across a sea of writhing bodies, but my eyes were fixed on a group of people at the edge of the crowd. They weren't dancing, they weren't smiling. And the way they scanned the festival grounds made my skin crawl. I'd come to Starlight Music Festival for 3 days of carefree fun. Instead, I found myself in the middle of a nightmare that would change everything I thought I knew about the world of music and festivals forever. My name is Alex, and I'm a die-hard music fan. I'd been counting down the days to Starlight for months, saving every penny from my barista job to afford the tickets. My best friends, Jess and Mike, were just as excited. We arrived on Friday afternoon, pitching our tent in the sprawling campground and joining the throngs of festival goers streaming towards the main stage. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We danced until our feet ached, sang along to our favorite bands until our voices were hoarse, and reveled in the electric atmosphere that only a music festival can create. As night fell and the headliners took the stage, I felt that familiar rush of euphoria, of being part of something bigger than myself. It was during a set change on Saturday afternoon that I first noticed them. A group of about 10 people, dressed in dark clothes that stood out among the sea of colorful festival wear. They moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd with an intensity that seemed at odds with the laid-back vibe of the festival. "Check out the Knock Squad," Mike joked, nodding towards them. "Guess someone's not here for the music." I laughed it off, but something about the group nagged at me. They didn't look like any security or police I'd ever seen at a festival. And the way they communicated, quick hand signals, hushed conversations into concealed earpieces, spoke of a level of organization that went beyond simple crowd control. As the day wore on, I kept spotting members of the group in different areas of the festival grounds. They seemed to be everywhere, by the food vendors, near the VIP areas, even backstage from what I could see. And always watching, always on high alert. "You're being paranoid," Jess told me when I pointed them out again. "It's probably just extra security because of what happened at Glastonbury last year." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way they occasionally approached certain festival goers, leading them away for brief, intense conversations, or how they seemed to be particularly interested in the area around the medical tents. By Sunday morning, my curiosity had gotten the better of me. While Jess and Mike slept off the previous night's excesses, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I grabbed my camera, figuring I could use the excuse of taking festival photos if anyone questioned me. I started by following one of the group members I'd recognized from the day before. He led me on a winding path through the campgrounds, stopping occasionally to speak into his earpiece. Finally, he ducked behind a row of porta potties, disappearing from view. Heart racing. I crept closer, camera at the ready. As I peered around the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man was kneeling beside an unmarked van, its back doors open to reveal a high-tech interior filled with monitors and communications equipment. But it was what he was loading into the van that truly horrified me. A large, clear container filled with what looked like hundreds of small, glowing capsules. I raised my camera on instinct, the shutter clicking before I could think better of it. The sound, barely audible over the distant music, was enough to alert the man. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine with a look of cold fury. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, weaving through tents and dodging confused campers. I could hear footsteps behind me, gaining ground with every second. Panic clouded my thoughts as I realized I had no idea where I was going. The festival grounds had become a maze, and I was the rat being hunted. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me sideways. I opened my mouth to scream, but another hand clamped over it, muffling the sound. I found myself pressed against the side of a food truck, hidden from view by a stack of empty boxes. "Quiet," a voice hissed in my ear. "They'll hear you." I turned to see a girl about my age, her festival wristbands marking her as another attendee. She held a finger to her lips, then pointed. I followed her gaze to see two of the dark-clothed figures run past our hiding spot, clearly searching for me. When they were gone, the girl released me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning me for injuries. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Who are you? What's going on?" She introduced herself as Maya. "I'm with a group called Festival Watch," she explained. "We've been tracking these guys for months. They show up at festivals all over the country, always with the same MO." "What are they doing?" I asked, thinking of the glowing capsules I'd seen. Maya's face darkened. "They're using the festivals as cover for a massive drug operation, but not just any drugs. The stuff they're peddling, it's not from this world, Alex." I started at the use of my name, but Maya waved off my surprise. "And we've been watching you too, ever since you started noticing them. We needed to be sure you weren't one of them." My head was spinning. "Not from this world? What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," Maya said grimly. "Those capsules you saw, they contain a substance that originated elsewhere. Something that can alter human consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand." She went on to explain that the group, which called itself Starfire, had been using music festivals as distribution points for years. The chaos and altered states already present at these events made them perfect cover for introducing an otherworldly substance into the population. But why? I asked. What's their endgame? Maya shook her head. We're not sure. But based on what we've seen, we think they're preparing for something big. Some kind of mass event that requires a significant portion of the population to be changed. The implications were staggering. I thought of all the people I'd seen at the festival, dancing and laughing without a care in the world. How many of them had unknowingly ingested this alien substance? How many were even now being altered in ways they couldn't comprehend? We need your help, Alex, Maya said, her voice urgent. You've got an in that we don't, your camera. We need evidence, something concrete we can take to the authorities. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run, to grab Jess and Mike, and get as far away from this insanity as possible. But a larger part knew I couldn't walk away, not now that I knew what was at stake. What do you need me to do? I asked. The next few hours were a blur of covert movements and heart-stopping close calls. Maya and I worked our way through the festival, documenting Starfire's activities as best we could without being detected. We saw them make drops at designated points, watched as unsuspecting festival-goers were approached and given free samples of a new party drug. But it was what we discovered in the medical tent that truly drove home the horror of the situation. Under the guise of treating dehydration and heat stroke, Starfire operatives were administering the alien substance to incapacitated patients. I managed to get several clear photos of the process, my hands shaking as I realized the scale of what we were up against. As the festival's final night reached its peak, Maya and I made our way to the rendezvous point she'd arranged with her Festival Watch colleagues. We were so close to getting out, to blowing this whole thing wide open. But Starfire had other plans. We were less than 50 yards from safety when the first explosion rocked the grounds. Screams filled the air as panic spread through the crowd. In the chaos that followed, I lost sight of Maya. I searched desperately, calling her name, but it was useless. The sea of terrified people swept me along, away from the exits and deeper into the heart of the festival. As smoke filled the air and more explosions sounded in the distance, I realized with horror that this was it. The mass event Maya had warned about. Starfire was making its move, using the panic and confusion to blanket the entire festival in their alien substance. I fought my way through the crowd, my camera clutched tightly to my chest. I had to get out, had to get this evidence to someone who could help. But as I neared the perimeter, I saw them, Starfire operatives forming a barrier, preventing anyone from leaving. In that moment, as the world descended into chaos around me, I understood that the Starlight Music Festival had been just the beginning. Whatever Starfire had planned, it was bigger than this one event, bigger than anything we could have imagined. I looked down at my camera, at the evidence it contained, and made a decision. I might not be able to stop what was happening here, but I could make sure the world knew the truth. With shaking hands, I found a hiding spot and began uploading the photos to every social media platform I could access. As I hit send on the final upload, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to see one of the Starfire operatives, his eyes cold behind his dark glasses. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with us," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. As he led me away, I caught a glimpse of the main stage. The headlining act was still playing, oblivious or indifferent to the chaos. Their music, once a source of joy, now felt like a funeral dirge for the world as we knew it. The Starlight Music Festival had become ground zero for an invasion none of us saw coming. And as I was marched towards an uncertain fate, I couldn't help but wonder, how many other festivals, how many other unsuspecting crowds were even now falling under Starfire's influence? The music played on, but the song remained the same, a haunting melody of a world on the brink of an unimaginable change. The coffee pot gurgled its last, filling the diner with the rich aroma of fresh brew. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. The witching hour at Joe's all-night diner, when the fluorescent lights buzzed a little louder and the shadows in the corners seemed to deepen. That's when they walked in. Right on schedule. 4 men and 2 women, each wearing expressions that didn't quite fit their faces, like masks that had slipped ever so slightly. I've been watching them for weeks now, and I knew one thing for certain. These weren't your typical late-night patrons looking for greasy comfort food. No, these people were up to something. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time they walked through that door. My name's Sarah, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Joe's for almost a year now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of time to work on my novel during the quiet hours. Or at least, it used to be quiet before they started showing up. It began about a month ago. Just another night of serving truckers and insomniacs when this group walked in. At first, I didn't think much of it. Late-night business meetings aren't unheard of, especially in a city that never sleeps. But as I refilled their coffee cups and caught snippets of their conversation, I realized this was no ordinary meeting. They spoke in hushed tones, using words and phrases that made no sense. The convergence is approaching, one man would say. Have the vessels been prepared? Another would reply. They'd pass folders across the table, their eyes darting around the diner as if checking for eavesdroppers. I did my best to act natural, to be the invisible waitress they clearly wanted me to be. But curiosity got the better of me. I started paying closer attention, noting the times they'd arrive, the booth they always chose, the strange symbols I sometimes glimpsed on the papers they studied. Tonight was no different. They filed into their usual booth, ordered their usual coffees, black, no sugar, and immediately huddled over a map one of them spread across the table. I approached, coffee pot in hand, straining to hear their whispered conversation. The alignment is perfect, the oldest man was saying, his finger tracing a line on the map. If we act now, we can... He cut off abruptly as I reached the table, his eyes snapping up to meet mine. For a moment, just the briefest instant, I could have sworn his pupils were not round, but vertical slits, like a cat's. I blinked, and they were normal again. More coffee? I asked, proud of how steady I kept my voice. They nodded, pushing their cups towards me without a word. As I poured, I tried to get a better look at the map, but one of the women smoothly covered it with her arm. Anything else I can get you? I asked, stalling for time. No, thank you, the oldest man replied, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. We're fine. I nodded and retreated, but not before catching one last whispered phrase. The gate will open at dawn. Back behind the counter, I pretended to wipe down the already spotless surface while watching them from the corner of my eye. They had resumed their intense discussion, heads bowed low over the table. Over the next hour, I caught fragments of their conversation, each one more bizarre than the last. They spoke of energy nodes and dimensional rifts, of elder signs and cosmic alignments. It was like listening to a group of cult members planning some sort of ritual. Except these people didn't look like any cult members I'd ever seen. They were well-dressed, well-spoken, and carried themselves with an air of authority that spoke of power and influence. As the night wore on, their discussion grew more heated. The oldest man seemed to be giving instructions to the others, his finger jabbing at various points on the map. The others nodded, occasionally making notes in small, leather-bound notebooks. At one point, the youngest woman in the group stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "This is madness," she hissed, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "You're going to get us all killed, or worse." The oldest man fixed her with a stare that made even me shiver from across the room. "Sit down, Eliza," he said, his voice low but carrying an undercurrent of menace. "You knew the risks when you joined us. It's far too late to back out now." Eliza hesitated for a moment, then slowly sank back into her chair. The tension at the table was palpable, and I found myself gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Just then, the bell above the door jingled, making me jump. A couple of drunk college kids stumbled in, laughing loudly. I welcomed the distraction, moving to take their order and trying to push the strange group out of my mind. But as I turned back towards their booth, notepad in hand, I froze. The table was empty. In the few seconds my back had been turned, they had vanished. Not just left the diner. Vanished. There was no way they could have made it to the door without me noticing. I rushed over to the booth, my heart pounding. The table was cleared, not a single cup or scrap of paper left behind. It was as if they had never been there at all. The rest of my shift passed in a daze. I kept replaying the night's events in my mind, trying to make sense of what I'd seen and heard. By the time my relief showed up at 6 a.m., I was convinced of two things. One, that group was up to something big and potentially dangerous. And two, they weren't entirely human. As I stepped out of the diner into the pale light of dawn, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. The oldest man's words echoed in my head, "The gate will open at dawn." I looked around, half expecting to see some sort of otherworldly portal materializing in the middle of the street. But everything looked normal. Cars were starting to fill the roads as the city woke up. Oblivious to the strange events of the night, I began my walk home, my mind racing. Should I go to the police? But what would I tell them? That I'd overheard a group of possibly non-human entities planning to open some kind of interdimensional gate. They'd think I was crazy. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed it. A flicker of movement in an alley I was passing. I turned, and for a split second, I saw them. The group from the diner, standing in a circle around a glowing symbol etched onto the ground. In the center of the circle was what looked like a tear in the very fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of colors that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Then, as quickly as I'd seen it, it was gone. The alley was empty, the pavement unmarked. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Or was my imagination, fueled by lack of sleep and too much coffee, playing tricks on me? I don't know how long I stood there staring into the empty alley. Eventually, the honk of a car horn jolted me back to reality. I turned and hurried home, locking the door behind me and drawing all the curtains. As I lay in bed, exhaustion finally overtaking me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The world outside my window was the same one I'd always known. But now I knew it was just a thin veneer, a fragile shell hiding truths too vast and terrifying for most to comprehend. I knew I'd go back to the diner for my next shift. I knew I'd keep watching, keep listening, trying to piece together the puzzle of what that group was up to. But I also knew that my life would never be the same. I had glimpsed behind the curtain, seen the strings that puppet our reality, and now that I'd seen them, I couldn't unsee them. As I drifted off to sleep, one last thought floated through my mind. Next time they came into the diner, would I have the courage to confront them, to demand answers? Or would I continue to play the role of the unassuming waitress, silent witness to events beyond my understanding? I didn't know. But I did know one thing for certain. The next time that group walked through the door of Joe's all-night diner, I'd be ready. Because whatever they were planning, whatever gate they had opened, I had a feeling it was just the beginning. And someone needed to be there to watch, to remember, to warn others if necessary. That someone, for better or worse, was me, Sarah, the graveyard shift waitress, unwitting guardian of the threshold between our world and whatever lay beyond. God help me. The first night in our new home, I woke to the sound of my daughter's scream. By the time I reached her room, heart pounding, she was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. The man in the wall was watching me. "Mommy," she whispered. I checked every corner, looked behind every curtain, but found nothing. I chalked it up to a nightmare, a child's fear of a new place. I was wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how our dream home became a nightmare. When my husband Tom got a promotion that required us to relocate, we saw it as an opportunity for a fresh start. Our realtor showed us dozens of houses, but the moment we stepped into 42 Willow Lane, we knew it was the one. A beautiful Victorian, lovingly restored, with plenty of space for our family of 4. The price was surprisingly reasonable for such a gem, but we didn't question our good fortune. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. Our son, Jack, took to the new house immediately, claiming the attic as his fortress of solitude. Our daughter, Emma, was more hesitant, but we assumed she just needed time to adjust. Then came that first night, and Emma's scream. In the light of day, I convinced myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination. But as the days passed, Emma's fear only grew. She refused to sleep in her room, insisting on curling up on our bedroom floor. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her normally bubbly personality became subdued. "The man in the wall doesn't like us being here," she told me one morning over breakfast, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says we need to leave before it's too late." I shared my concerns with Tom, but he brushed them off. "Kids have imaginary friends all the time," he said. "She'll grow out of it." But it wasn't just Emma. Strange things began happening around the house. Items would disappear, only to turn up in odd places days later. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, leaving us shivering even in the middle of summer. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard footsteps in the hallway, even though I knew everyone was asleep. One afternoon, while Tom was at work and the kids were at school, I decided to do some digging into the house's history. The local library had archives of old newspapers, and I spent hours poring over microfiche. What I found chilled me to the bone. In 1923, the house had belonged to a reclusive inventor named Jeremiah Blackwood. He'd become obsessed with the idea of interdimensional travel, convinced he could create a portal to other worlds. The last article I found described how neighbors had called the police after hearing strange noises coming from the house. When officers arrived, they found Blackwood dead in the basement, his body contorted in ways that defied explanation. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but the reporter noted that the responding officers refused to discuss what they'd seen. I left the library feeling shaken, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed a figure in the upstairs window, a man's silhouette, watching me. But it vanished the moment I blinked. That night, I confronted Tom with what I'd learned. He listened, his face growing more serious with each word. "Claire," he said finally, "I think there's something I need to show you." He led me to the basement, to a corner we'd used for storage. Moving aside some boxes, he revealed a section of wall that looked wrong somehow. The bricks didn't quite line up, and there was a faint line running around the edges, as if it were a door. "I found this a few days ago," Tom admitted. "I didn't want to worry you, but I've been hearing things, whispers, coming from behind here." Together, we pushed against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding noise that set my teeth on edge, the hidden door swung open. The space beyond was pitch black, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Tom's flashlight beam revealed a small room, its walls covered in strange symbols and diagrams. In the center stood a metal contraption that looked like a cross between a Tesla coil and a medieval torture device. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Blackwood's lab. It's been here all along." As we stepped into the room, the temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and I felt a presence pressing in around us, watchful and malevolent. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. Tom spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The flashlight flickered and died. plunging us into darkness. And then we heard it, a voice, raspy and filled with a hunger that made my skin crawl. At last, it said, "New subjects for my experiments." The air in front of us shimmered, and a figure began to take shape. It was vaguely human, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite define. Its edges seemed to blur, as if it wasn't fully in our reality. "Who? What are you?" Tom demanded, his voice shaking. The figure's mouth stretched into something approximating a smile. "I am Jeremiah Blackwood, of course. Or what's left of him. My experiment was a success, you see. I opened a door to another world, but I didn't account for what might come through from the other side." As he spoke, more shapes began to materialize around us. Twisted, impossible forms that hurt to look at directly. I felt my sanity beginning to fray at the edges. "For decades, I've been trapped between worlds," Blackwood continued. "Unable to fully manifest but unable to move on. I've waited so long for a family like yours to move in. Your fear, your belief, it gives me strength. And now, with your help, I can finally complete my work." The other entities moved closer, their non-Euclidean geometries making me dizzy. I clutched Tom's hand, my mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I heard Emma's voice, muffled but clear, coming from the other side of the door. "Mommy, Daddy, are you down there?" "Emma, run!" I shouted. "Get out of the house!" Blackwood's form flickered, his attention divided. In that moment of distraction, Tom lunged for the contraption in the center of the room. He grabbed it, straining to lift the heavy metal. "No!" Blackwood shrieked, lunging towards us. But he was too late. With a yell of effort, Tom hurled the device against the wall. It shattered in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The air itself seemed to tear, a howling vortex opening where the machine had stood. Blackwood and the other entities were drawn towards it, their forms stretching and distorting as they were pulled into the rift. "You fools!" Blackwood's voice echoed as he disappeared into the void. "You've doomed us all." The vortex grew, the edges of the room beginning to warp and bend. I could feel it pulling at me, an irresistible force threatening to drag us into whatever hellish dimension lay beyond. Just when I thought all was lost, the door burst open. Emma stood there, her small face set in determination. In her hands, she held a crumpled piece of paper. I drew the symbols to close the door. She shouted over the roar of the vortex, like the man in the wall showed me. Before I could stop her, Emma threw the paper into the rift. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like reality itself tearing, and then silence. We found ourselves lying on the basement floor, the hidden room gone as if it had never existed. The wall was whole, unbroken. No trace remained of Blackwood's lab or the horrors we'd witnessed. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Emma told us about the nice man in the wall, not Blackwood, but another spirit who had been trying to warn us, to protect us from what lurked in the house. We put the house up for sale immediately, unable to stay another night under that roof. As we drove away for the last time, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the upstairs window, a man, nodding solemnly. A protector, standing guard against the darkness that had nearly claimed us. We never spoke publicly about what happened at 42 Willow Lane. Who would believe us? But sometimes, late at night, I still hear phantom footsteps in the hallway. And I wonder about that rift, that tear in reality. Did we truly close it? Or is it still there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon its secrets? One thing I know for certain, our experience changed us forever. We learned that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined. That sometimes, the things we dismiss as children's fears or overactive imaginations are all too real. And that the boundary between our world and others is far more fragile than we'd like to believe. So if you're ever house hunting, and you come across a beautiful old Victorian at a price that seems too good to be true, remember our story. Because sometimes, a dream home can hide a nightmare. And the walls, well, they might just be watching. The moment I saw the hooded figures gathered around the glowing symbol etched into the snow, I knew I'd stumbled onto something I was never meant to see. The cheerful sounds of the winter carnival faded away, replaced by an eerie chanting that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I should have turned and run, should have lost myself in the crowd of oblivious revelers. Instead, my curiosity got the better of me. That decision would plunge me into a nightmare that blurred the lines between reality and madness, and showed me the terrifying secrets lurking beneath the surface of our world. My name is Jamie, and I came to Quebec City's Winter Carnival looking for a fun escape from my mundane life. As a freelance writer struggling to make ends meet, I jumped at the chance when my friend Mark invited me to stay with him for the festival. The first couple of days were everything I'd hoped for. Ice sculptures glittering in the sun, the intoxicating scent of mulled wine and maple taffy, streets filled with laughter and music. It was on the third night that everything changed. Mark had gone off with some local friends, leaving me to explore on my own. I wandered through the fairgrounds, taking in the sights and sounds of the carnival in full swing. Families crowded around game booths, couples snuggled close on carnival rides, and the air was filled with a cacophony of languages as tourists from around the world enjoyed the festivities. I was making my way towards the famous Ice Palace when I noticed a gap in the crowd. It was subtle, just a small area where people seemed to unconsciously veer away, their eyes sliding past as if there was nothing to see. Intrigued, I moved closer. That's when I saw them. A group of about a dozen people, their faces obscured by heavy winter hoods, standing in a tight circle. They were chanting softly, words I couldn't quite make out. At their feet, carved into the packed snow, was a complex symbol that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. I blinked, sure I was seeing things, but the glow remained, pulsing gently in time with the chanting. As I watched, transfixed, one of the figures raised their arms. The chanting grew louder, and the symbol's light intensified. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, heart pounding, to find myself face to face with an elderly man. His eyes were sharp beneath bushy white brows, and he wore the uniform of a carnival worker. "You shouldn't be here, boy," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "This ain't for your eyes." Before I could respond, he was steering me away from the scene, his grip surprisingly strong. As we moved back into the crowd, I glanced over my shoulder. The hooded figures were gone, the symbol erased as if it had never existed. "What was that?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Who were those people?" The old man sighed, releasing my arm. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. What you saw was the Société de l'Hiver, the Winter Society. They've been a part of this carnival since its beginnings, though most folks don't know it." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd as if checking for eavesdroppers. "They say the society keeps the winter at bay, performs rituals to ensure the carnival's success. But that's just the surface. The truth. Well, the truth is far stranger and more dangerous than most could handle." I opened my mouth to ask more questions, but he held up a hand to stop me. "I've already said too much. For your own safety, forget what you saw. Enjoy the carnival, then go home and never look back. Some mysteries are best left unsolved." With that, he melted into the crowd, leaving me standing alone with my thoughts whirling. I should have listened to him. Should have chalked it up to an odd experience and gone back to my carefree vacation. But the writer in me, the part always hungry for a good story, couldn't let it go. Over the next day, I found myself watching the carnival with new eyes. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. Carnival workers with strange symbols stitched into their uniforms, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached, areas of the fairgrounds that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. I tried to talk to Mark about it, but he laughed it off. "You've been drinking too much caribou," he said, referring to the potent mix of whiskey and wine popular at the carnival. Next, you'll be telling me you've seen the Bonhomme Carnival come to life. But I knew what I'd seen, and I was determined to find out more. That night, I slipped out of Mark's apartment and made my way back to the fairgrounds. The carnival was in full swing, but I ignored the attractions, focusing instead on the shadows between the tents and booths. For hours, I wandered, growing increasingly frustrated. Just as I was about to give up, I saw it, a hooded figure slipping behind a maintenance shed. Heart pounding, I followed. Behind the shed was a door I hadn't noticed before, carved with the same symbol I'd seen in the snow. The figure touched it, murmured something I couldn't catch, and the door swung open. Without thinking, I darted forward, slipping inside just before it closed. I found myself in a long, dark corridor that seemed to slope gently downward. The walls were made of packed snow and ice, glowing faintly with that same otherworldly blue light. I could hear chanting in the distance, growing louder as I crept forward. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, and I had to stifle a gasp. Dozens of hooded figures stood in concentric circles around a central dais. On the dais stood an imposing figure in ornate robes, their face hidden behind an intricate mask that looked like it was carved from ice. Brothers and sisters of the winter, the masked figure intoned, their voice echoing unnaturally in the chamber. The time of the great frost approaches. Soon, we will open the way for the Ice Queen to return to our world. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the frigid air. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. For centuries, we have kept the balance, the leader continued. We have held back the eternal winter, allowing the world its seasons. But the time of mankind's dominion is ending. The Ice Queen calls, and we must answer. The chanting grew louder, and the blue glow intensified. To my horror, I saw the air in the center of the chamber begin to ripple and tear. Through the growing rift, I caught glimpses of a world of endless ice and snow, of crystalline spires that stretched into a starless sky. A figure began to emerge from the portal. Tall, inhumanly beautiful, with skin like fresh snow and eyes that gleamed like glaciers. The Ice Queen, I realized with a jolt of terror. In that moment, my foot slipped on the icy floor. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall with a soft thud. It wasn't much, but in the charged atmosphere of the chamber, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head turned in my direction. I saw eyes glowing with a cold, alien intelligence beneath those hoods, and I ran. I burst out of the hidden door, sprinting through the carnival. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the pounding of feet. The cheerful lights and sounds of the festival became a nightmarish blur as I dodged through crowds and leapt over barriers. I don't know how long I ran, or how I managed to lose my pursuers. By the time I felt safe enough to stop, I was in a quiet residential area far from the fairgrounds, my lungs burning from the frigid air. I made my way back to Mark's apartment in a daze, my mind reeling from what I'd witnessed. I knew I couldn't stay. The Winter Society would be looking for me. I packed my bags and left a note for Mark, making up an excuse about a family emergency. As I waited for a taxi to the airport, snow began to fall. But these weren't the light, cheerful flakes of the past few days. These were heavy and relentless, driven by a wind that howled with an almost human voice. I thought of the rift I'd seen, of the Ice Queen stepping into our world. What had I set in motion by interrupting their ritual? Would anyone believe me if I tried to warn them? The taxi arrived, and as we drove through streets already white with fresh snow, I made a decision. I would write it all down, everything I'd seen and heard. Maybe someone would believe it. Maybe it would help when the eternal winter came. Because I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it was coming. The carnival's cheerful facade had cracked, revealing the ancient and terrible forces that had always lurked beneath. And as the snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the last winter that ended, and the first of an endless, frozen future. The moment our sailboat rounded the craggy cliffs of the uncharted island, I knew we had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Pristine white beaches stretched as far as the eye could see, framed by lush jungle that seemed to pulse with life. Paradise found, we thought. But as we dropped anchor and waded ashore, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something about this place felt off. If only we had listened to that instinct. If only we had sailed away. But we didn't. And that decision would plunge us into a nightmare beyond anything we could have imagined. My name is Alex, and I was part of a crew of 6 friends who had decided to take a year off from our lives to sail around the world. We were 5 months into our journey when we spotted the island. It wasn't on any of our charts, which should have been our first warning sign. But we were young, adventurous, and more than a little reckless. As we made our way up the beach, marveling at the untouched beauty around us, we spotted something that made us stop in our tracks. Nestled at the edge of the tree line was a small village. The structures were unlike anything I'd ever seen, a bizarre blend of modern and primitive, with sleek metal frameworks wrapped in vines and leaves. "Hello," I called out, but there was no response. The village seemed deserted. "Maybe they're shy," suggested Sarah, our resident anthropology buff. "Some isolated cultures can be wary of outsiders." We decided to explore further, our curiosity overriding any sense of caution. As we moved through the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Eyes seemed to peer at us from every shadow, every darkened doorway. It was Mark who found the first body. He had wandered into one of the structures and let out a strangled cry. We rushed to his side and immediately wished we hadn't. The corpse was human, mostly, but there were things about it that defied explanation. The elongated limbs, the translucent skin that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The eyes, God, the eyes, milky white and far too large for the face. "What the hell is this?" whispered Jake, our usually unflappable captain. Before anyone could respond, we heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from deeper in the jungle. Without discussion, we moved towards the sound, drawn by a compulsion none of us could explain. We emerged into a clearing and froze. Dozens of figures stood in concentric circles around a stone altar. They looked human at first glance, but upon closer inspection, we saw that they all shared the same otherworldly features as the corpse. On the altar lay a woman, a normal human woman. She was alive but seemed to be in some kind of trance. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied. One of the creatures stepped forward, raising a crystalline dagger that glowed with an inner light. "We have to do something," Sarah hissed. But before we could move, the creature plunged the dagger into the woman's chest. There was no blood. Instead, a blinding light erupted from the wound. The woman's body began to contort and change, her features morphing to match those of her captors. The shock of what we had witnessed broke whatever spell had been holding us in place. We turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, desperate to get back to our boat and away from this insanity. But we didn't make it far. Strong hands grabbed us from behind, dragging us back towards the village. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, but it was like trying to wrestle with living stone. We were brought before what I can only describe as their leader. He was taller than the others, with skin that shimmered like mother of pearl, and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies. "Welcome," he said, his voice resonating in a way that made my teeth ache. "We've been expecting you." Jake, always the brave one, spoke up. What do you want with us?" The leader smiled, revealing teeth that looked more like polished crystals than bone. "We are the future of humanity, the next step in evolution. And you, my friends, are going to help us bring that future to the rest of the world." Over the next few hours, we learned the horrifying truth. This island was home to a cult that had discovered a way to transcend humanity. Through a combination of genetic manipulation and what they called cosmic energy, they had transformed themselves into something they believed was superior to normal humans. But there was a catch. The process required a constant influx of new human DNA. They had been luring ships to the island for years, using the crew members as raw material for their twisted experiments. "You should be honored," the leader told us. "You're going to be part of something greater than yourselves. You'll shed your limited human forms and become like us. Immortal, powerful, divine." We were separated and locked in individual cells. Through the bars, I could see others. Failed experiments. I realized with growing horror. Humans in various stages of transformation. Some begging for death. Others too far gone to even recognize their own humanity anymore. Days blurred together. They fed us strange, glowing fruits that made our minds fuzzy and our bodies feel like they were on fire. I could feel myself changing, my senses becoming sharper even as my grip on reality began to slip. They took Sarah first. We heard her screams echoing through the village, then nothing. When I next saw her, she was different. Her eyes had that same galactic depth as the others, and her skin had a faint luminescence. But worst of all was her smile, vacant, beatific, and utterly devoid of the warmth and intelligence that had made her Sarah. One by one, they took the others. I was the last. As they dragged me towards the altar, I realized with a jolt of clarity that I was the only one left who remembered what it meant to be human. If I succumbed, there would be no one left to tell our story. No one to warn the world about what was happening on this island. With a strength born of desperation, I broke free from my captors. I ran, not towards the beach where I knew they would expect me to go, but deeper into the jungle. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. For days, I hid there, subsisting on whatever I could forage, constantly on guard. My body continued to change, but my mind, through sheer force of will, remained my own. I knew I couldn't stay on the island forever. Sooner or later, they would find me. I needed to escape, to warn others. My chance came during a violent storm. The cult members retreated to their structures, giving me the opportunity to make it to the beach. Our sailboat was gone, likely dashed against the rocks, but there was a smaller motorboat pulled up on the shore, an emergency vessel they kept for supply runs to other islands. I later learned. I don't remember much of the journey that followed. Days of drifting, hallucinating from dehydration and exposure. My body continuing its horrifying transformation. Finally, delirious and barely clinging to life, I was picked up by a fishing trawler. The doctors call it a rare genetic disorder. They've never seen anything like it. They poke and prod, take endless samples, but they're no closer to understanding what's happened to me. They don't believe my story about the island. How could they? It sounds insane even to my own ears, but I know the truth. And as I sit here in this hospital bed, watching my skin grow more translucent by the day, feeling the cosmic energy pulse through my veins, I'm filled with a terrible certainty. The cult leader's words echo in my mind. We are the future of humanity. They're still out there, on that uncharted island, waiting, watching, evolving. And sooner or later, they'll come for the rest of us. Because that's the thing about evolution. It doesn't ask permission. It simply moves forward, relentless and unstoppable. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to hold on to my humanity. Already, I can feel it slipping away, replaced by something vast and alien. But I'll fight it for as long as I can. I'll tell my story to anyone who will listen. Because someone needs to be ready. Someone needs to stand against the tide of change that's coming. The future is approaching, whether we want it or not. And it's more terrifying than anything we could have imagined. The headlights of the truck ahead of me winked out as it turned off the lonely highway and into a dense forest. I hesitated for a moment, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. This wasn't part of my usual route, but curiosity got the better of me. I'd been driving these roads for 15 years, and I'd never seen another trucker take this turn. As I followed the fading taillights into the darkness, I had no idea I was about to stumble into a world of secrets, rituals, and danger that would change my life forever. My name's Mike, and I've been a long-haul trucker since I was old enough to get my commercial license. It's a solitary life, just me and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me. But that night, as I guided my rig down that unmarked forest road, I felt a prickle of unease that I couldn't shake. The trees pressed in close on either side, their branches scraping against the sides of my truck. I was about to give up and turn around when suddenly the forest opened up into a large clearing. What I saw there made me slam on the brakes, my jaw dropping in disbelief. Dozens of big rigs were parked in a rough circle, their headlights illuminating a scene that looked like something out of a bizarre dream. In the center of the circle stood a group of people, truckers, by the look of their clothes, gathered around a roaring bonfire. They were chanting, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that sent chills down my spine. I killed my engine and sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to throw the truck in reverse and get the hell out of there. But another part, the part that had always hungered for something more than the monotony of the road, urged me to investigate. Slowly, I climbed down from the cab. As soon as my boots hit the ground, every head in the clearing turned to look at me. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of the fire. A man stepped forward from the group. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight. "Welcome, brother," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "We've been expecting you." I blinked in surprise. Expecting me? But I just stumbled upon this place by accident. The man, clearly the leader of this strange gathering, smiled. "There are no accidents on the road, my friend. The highway brought you here for a reason." He introduced himself as Garth and began to explain. This group called themselves the Brotherhood of the Endless Road. They were an ancient order of truckers, dating back to the very first traders who carried goods across vast distances. They believed that the act of driving, of moving constantly between places, gave them a unique connection to the fabric of reality itself. "We're more than just drivers, Mike," Garth said, his eyes boring into mine. "We're the circulatory system of the world. We keep things moving, keep the lifeblood of commerce flowing. And that gives us power. Power most people can't even begin to comprehend." As he spoke, the other truckers moved closer, forming a circle around us. I noticed that many of them wore strange amulets, miniature steering wheels or tiny model trucks cast in what looked like silver. "But with great power comes great responsibility," Garth continued. "There are forces out there that would use the roads for evil, dark energies that feed on accidents, on the pain and suffering of travelers. It's our job to keep those forces at bay, to protect the highways and everyone who uses them." It sounded crazy. Part of me was sure I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was dreaming all of this. But there was an undeniable energy in the air, a sense of something ancient and powerful stirring just beneath the surface of reality. "So what do you want from me?" I asked, my mouth dry. Garth's smile widened. "We want you to join us, Mike. Become part of the Brotherhood. Help us in our sacred duty." Before I could respond, one of the other truckers stepped forward. "Hold on, Garth," he said, his voice gruff. "We can't just let anyone join. He has to prove himself first." Garth nodded solemnly. "You're right, of course. Mike, are you willing to undergo the trials to prove your worth to the Brotherhood?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to run, to get back in my truck and drive until this weird night was nothing but a distant memory. But something held me there, a mix of curiosity and a strange sense of destiny. "What kind of trials?" I asked. The next few hours were a blur of bizarre rituals and tests. They blindfolded me and had me navigate an obstacle course using only the sound of a diesel engine as a guide. They quizzed me on obscure trucking regulations and the history of the American highway system. At one point, I found myself arm wrestling a man twice my size while reciting the names of every major interchange from coast to coast. But the final trial was the most intense. They led me to an old beat-up semi that looked like it had been through a war. "This is the ghost rig," Garth explained. "Legend has it that it's possessed by the spirit of a driver who died on the road. Your task is to drive it to the next truck stop and back, without letting it veer off course." I climbed into the cab, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the wheel. The moment I turned the key, I knew this was no ordinary truck. The engine roared to life with a sound that was almost animal, and I could feel vibrations through the seat that had nothing to do with the motor. As I pulled onto the highway, the wheel began to fight me. It was subtle at first, a slight pull to the left or right, but as the miles ticked by, it got stronger. The truck seemed determined to veer off into the oncoming lane or run itself off the road entirely. Sweat poured down my face as I wrestled with the steering wheel. The speedometer crept higher and higher, even though my foot was nowhere near the accelerator. Dark shapes flitted at the edges of my vision, and I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the CB radio, even though it wasn't turned on. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I saw the lights of the truck stop ahead. With a final surge of strength, I muscled the ghost rig into the parking lot. As soon as I cut the engine, the oppressive atmosphere vanished. I sat there for a moment, my shirt soaked with sweat, my arms trembling from the effort. The drive back was almost eerily calm in comparison. When I pulled back into the clearing, the Brotherhood erupted in cheers. I stumbled out of the cab on shaky legs, only to be engulfed in a sea of backslaps and handshakes. "You did it, brother," Garth said, beaming with pride, "and you've proven yourself worthy of joining our ranks." The initiation ceremony that followed was solemn and strange. I swore oaths to protect the roads and those who traveled them, to uphold the ancient traditions of the Brotherhood, and to keep our existence a secret from the outside world. They gave me one of those silver amulets, a tiny truck that seemed to hum with energy when I touched it. As dawn broke over the clearing, I climbed back into my own familiar rig, my head spinning with everything that had happened. Garth approached my window one last time. "Remember, Mike," he said, his voice low and serious. "You're one of us now. The road will call on you when it needs you. Be ready to answer." In the weeks and months that followed, I tried to convince myself it had all been some kind of shared hallucination. Maybe someone had spiked the coffee at that last truck stop. But every time I felt the weight of that silver amulet against my chest, I knew it had been real. And Garth was right. The road did call. I found myself instinctively avoiding stretches of highway just before major pileups occurred. I'd pick up hitchhikers who turned out to be lost souls, trapped between this world and the next, needing someone to drive them to their final rest. Once, I even faced off against a phantom truck that was trying to run a school bus off the road. The life of a long-haul trucker was never easy, but now it had taken on a whole new dimension of weirdness and danger. Yet strangely, I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now I know the truth, that the highways and byways of this country are more than just stretches of asphalt. They're alive in a way most people will never understand. And as long as I'm behind the wheel, as long as I'm part of the Brotherhood of the Endless Road, I'll be there to protect them. Because out here, in the dark of night with nothing but 18 wheels and a full tank of diesel, someone has to keep the real nightmares at bay. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a truck pull off onto a road that wasn't there a moment before, just keep on driving. Some secrets of the highway are best left undiscovered, but rest easy knowing that we're out here. The Brotherhood, keeping watch over the endless road. Stay safe and keep on trucking. The first time I saw them, I thought they were just fellow skiers enjoying the pristine slopes of Lake Louise. But as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the snow, I realized something was terribly wrong. They moved in perfect unison, their dark forms stark against the white landscape, and their eyes, God, their eyes seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the fading daylight. That's when I knew. This wasn't a ski trip anymore. This was a hunt, and I was the prey. My name is Emma. And what started as a solo cross-country skiing adventure in the Canadian Rockies turned into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. I'd always been an avid skier, but this was my first time tackling the backcountry trails of Banff National Park alone. The first 2 days were exhilarating. Pristine powder, breathtaking views, and the profound silence that only comes when you're truly alone in the wilderness. On the third day, I decided to push myself, venturing further into the park than I'd originally planned. The weather was perfect, crisp and clear, and I felt invincible as I glided through the snow-laden forest. It was late afternoon when I first noticed them. Just a glimpse at first. Dark figures moving between the trees, almost too fast to track. I paused, squinting against the glare of the sun on snow. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I saw them again, closer this time. There were 5 of them, dressed in black ski gear that seemed to absorb the light around them. They moved with an unsettling grace, more like they were gliding over the snow than skiing through it. And they were heading straight for me. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that was foolish. They were clearly better skiers than me. And in this terrain, running would only lead to exhaustion or injury. I raised a hand in greeting, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello there. Beautiful day for skiing, isn't it?" They didn't respond. They didn't even slow down. As they drew closer, I could see their faces, or rather, the lack of them. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, featureless black, like their ski masks had melded with their skin. Panic surged through me. Without conscious thought, I turned and began skiing as fast as I dared, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who or what these beings were, but I knew with bone-deep certainty that I didn't want them to catch me. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer caring about stealth or grace. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their skis making an unnatural hissing sound against the snow. They were gaining on me, moving with a speed and agility that seemed impossible. As the light faded, the forest became a maze of shadows and half-glimpsed movements. Every tree looked the same, every clearing a potential dead end. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time seemed to warp in the face of my terror. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed with fatigue, but still I pushed on. Whenever I thought I'd lost them, I'd catch a glimpse of those dark forms moving through the trees, always just at the edge of my vision. Night fell, plunging the forest into near total darkness. I fumbled for my headlamp, almost dropping it in my haste. As the beam cut through the gloom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Tracks in the snow, my tracks, forming a circle. I'd been going in circles. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, the headlamp beam dancing wildly across the trees. For a split second, I caught sight of one of my pursuers. It was so close I could have reached out and touched it. Its face, if you could call it that, seemed to ripple and shift, as if it couldn't quite decide what form to take. I screamed then, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the silent forest. I turned to flee, but my ski caught on a hidden root. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I struggled to my feet, I realized with horror that one of my skis had snapped. Desperation lent me strength. I unclipped the broken ski and began to half run, half shuffle through the deep snow. It was slow going, and I knew with grim certainty that I couldn't keep this up for long. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw a light in the distance, a cabin. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the ache in my legs. Behind me, I could hear them getting closer, their strange hissing breath cutting through the night air. I burst into the small clearing where the cabin stood, almost sobbing with relief. But as I reached for the door, my heart sank. It was locked, the windows dark and shuttered. This wasn't salvation. It was just another dead end. I turned to face my pursuers, my back pressed against the cabin door. They emerged from the tree line one by one, their dark forms seeming to absorb what little light there was. They moved slowly now, almost leisurely, as if they knew they had me trapped. As they drew closer, I could feel a strange energy emanating from them, a cold that went beyond physical sensation. It was like standing at the edge of a void, feeling reality itself start to unravel. The leader, at least, I assumed it was the leader, stepped forward. Its face rippled and shifted, settling into a grotesque approximation of human features. When it spoke, its voice was like ice cracking, sending shivers down my spine. "Emma," it said, my name sounding wrong in its mouth. "We've been waiting for you." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The thing's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile on a human face. On it, the expression was terrifying. "We are the Winterkin," it said. "As for what we want you to join us, of course, to become one with the winter, as we have." It reached out a hand, and I saw that its fingers ended in sharp and icy points. "The process is uncomfortable," it continued. "But afterwards, you'll understand. You'll be free from the limitations of your fragile human form. You'll never feel cold or fear or pain again." I pressed myself harder against the door, trying to put even an inch more distance between us. "And if I refuse?" The thing's smile widened, revealing teeth like icicles. "Oh, Emma, what makes you think you have a choice?" Just as its hand was about to touch me, a bright light flooded the clearing. The Winterkin recoiled, hissing in pain or anger. I heard the roar of an engine, and suddenly a snowmobile burst into view, its headlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Get on," a voice shouted. I didn't hesitate. I leapt onto the back of the snowmobile, clinging to the driver as we shot off into the night. Behind us, I could hear the Winterkin's shrieks of fury fading into the distance. My rescuer, I learned, was a park ranger named Jack. He'd been out on a routine patrol when he'd seen my headlamp and decided to investigate. As we sped towards safety, I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. To his credit, Jack didn't outright dismiss my story. "There are strange things in these mountains," he said, his voice grim. "Things that most people never see and wouldn't believe if they did. You're lucky to have escaped with your life." We made it back to the ranger station just as dawn was breaking. As the first rays of sunlight touched the snow-capped peaks, I felt the terror of the night begin to recede. But I knew I would never forget what I'd seen, what I'd almost become. I gave my statement to the authorities, but as I expected, they didn't believe me. They chalked it up to hypothermia and exhaustion. A cautionary tale about the dangers of solo backcountry skiing. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all just a hallucination brought on by fear and fatigue. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear them calling to me. The Winterkin, waiting in the snowy wilderness, patient and eternal as the mountains themselves. And I know that a part of me will always be running, skiing through an endless night, trying to escape their icy embrace. So if you ever find yourself alone in the backcountry, and you see dark figures moving too smoothly across the snow, don't stop. Don't look back. Just ski as fast as you can towards the light and warmth of civilization, because the winter is vast and deep, and there are things lurking in its depths that hunger for more than just your body heat. They want your humanity, your very essence. And once they catch you, there's no turning back. The Winterkin are out there, waiting, and winter, as they say, is coming. The first call came at exactly 2:17 a.m. I remember because I just glanced at the clock, wondering if I should give up on sleep altogether. The shrill ring pierced the silence of the cabin, making me jump. Who could be calling at this hour? As I reached for the phone, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me this wasn't a wrong number or a drunken friend. When I answered, The voice on the other end confirmed my worst fears. "I can see you," it whispered, low and menacing. "And I'm coming for you." My name is Alex. And what was supposed to be a relaxing week alone in a remote cabin turned into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. I'd rented the place on a whim, needing to escape the chaos of city life and finally finish the novel I'd been working on for years. It seemed perfect. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me and the great outdoors. The rental agent had given me a strange look when I said I wanted to stay there alone, but I brushed it off. I was a city kid after all. What did I know about the quirks of small-town folk? The first couple of days were blissful. I'd wake up to the sound of birds chirping, spend my mornings riding on the porch, and my afternoons hiking the nearby trails. By night, I'd curl up by the fireplace with a good book, relishing the silence that was so hard to find back home. But on the third night, things changed. I'd gone to bed early, hoping to get an early start on writing the next day. I tossed and turned for hours, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. That's when the phone rang. After that first chilling call, I tried to convince myself it was just a prank. The cabin had a landline for emergencies, but surely no one knew I was here. I unplugged the phone and tried to go back to sleep. But every creak of the old wooden structure, every rustle of leaves outside set my nerves on edge. Morning came, and with it, a semblance of normalcy. In the light of day, my fears seemed foolish. I plugged the phone back in, chiding myself for being so jumpy. I was halfway through my morning coffee when it rang again. This time, the voice was different. A woman, her tone urgent and terrified. "You need to leave," she said. "It's not safe there. They're coming." Before I could ask who they were, the line went dead. My hand shook as I put down the receiver. This was no prank. Something was very, very wrong. I started packing my things, my mind racing. Who was calling? Who was coming for me? And why? I was shoving clothes into my bag when I heard it. A car engine, growing louder as it approached the cabin. Relief flooded through me. Maybe it was the rental agent coming to check on me, or even the local police responding to the strange calls. But as I looked out the window, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a car at all, but an old pickup truck. Its paint faded and rust eating away at the edges. 3 men got out, each carrying what looked like hunting rifles. They didn't look like any police I'd ever seen. I dug down, praying they hadn't seen me. Through a crack in the curtains, I watched as they spread out, circling the cabin with practiced efficiency. They moved silently, communicating with hand signals I didn't understand. My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. The back door. If I could just make it to the woods, maybe I could lose them. I grabbed my bag and crept towards the kitchen, wincing at every creak of the floorboards. I had just reached for the door handle when a voice called out, "We know you're in there, city boy. Come on out and make this easy on yourself." Panic surged through me. How did they know who I was? What did they want? I remained frozen, unsure what to do. "Last chance," the voice called again. "Come out, or we're coming in." In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I yanked open the door and ran. The forest was a blur of green and brown as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering bark inches from my head. This wasn't a game or a misunderstanding. These men wanted me dead. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. The dense forest that had seemed so peaceful just yesterday was now a maze of potential hiding spots and deadly obstacles. Every root threatened to trip me, every branch to betray my position. As I paused behind a large tree, trying to catch my breath and get my bearings, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Dogs. They had dogs. The baying grew louder, and I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. That's when I saw it. A small cave entrance, half hidden by fallen leaves and branches. Without thinking, I dove inside. It was a tight fit, and the darkness was absolute. But at least it was a hiding spot. I don't know how long I lay there, barely daring to breathe. I could hear the men and dogs moving around outside, their voices drifting in and out of earshot. At one point they came so close I was sure they'd find me. But gradually, the sounds faded. As silence fell, a new fear gripped me. What if they were just waiting me out? I couldn't stay in this cave forever. I needed help, but who could I trust? The strange calls came back to me. Someone had tried to warn me. But who? Gathering my courage, I peeked out of the cave. The forest seemed empty, but I knew appearances could be deceiving. I started making my way back towards the road, moving as quietly as I could, every sense on high alert. It was nearly dark by the time I reached the highway. I stuck to the tree line, not daring to expose myself on the open road. That's when I saw the lights of an approaching car. It was now or never. I stepped out, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed, and I saw it was an old station wagon driven by an elderly woman. She rolled down her window, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I make her understand the terror of the past few hours? Before I could speak, I saw another set of headlights approaching from the direction of the cabin. The pickup truck. They had found me. "Please," I begged the woman. "I need help. Those men are trying to kill me." To her credit, she didn't hesitate. "Get in," she said, reaching over to unlock the passenger door. I scrambled into the car just as the truck roared past. In the rearview mirror, I saw it screech to a halt and start to turn around. "Hold on," the woman said, her foot pressing the accelerator to the floor. The old station wagon surged forward with more power than I would have thought possible. As we sped down the highway, the woman introduced herself as Margaret. "I've been trying to warn people about those men for years," she said. "They prey on outsiders, people who won't be missed, but no one ever believes me." "You," I realized, "you were the one who called me." She nodded grimly. "I try to keep an eye on who rents that cabin. When I saw a young man from the city had taken it for a week, I knew you'd be a target. I'm just glad I got to you in time." We drove through the night, Margaret explaining more as we went. The men were part of a cult that had operated in these woods for generations. They believed that by sacrificing outsiders, they could maintain their power over the area. The local authorities were either in on it or too scared to intervene. As dawn broke, we reached the state line. Margaret insisted on driving me all the way back to the city, not trusting that I'd be safe until I was far from those woods. When we finally pulled up outside my apartment building, I turned to thank her, only to find an empty seat beside me. Margaret, the station wagon. All of it was gone. I was sitting on the curb, my bag next to me, as if I'd been dropped off by a taxi. Had any of it been real? Had I imagined the whole terrifying ordeal? But as I stood up, my muscles aching from the chase through the woods, I felt something in my pocket. It was a small, smooth stone with a strange symbol carved into it. For protection, Margaret's voice seemed to whisper in my mind. I've never gone back to those woods, and I've warned everyone I know to stay away from that cabin. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear the baying of dogs in the distance. And every now and then, my phone will ring at exactly 2:17 a.m. When I answer, there's nothing but static on the line. But I know it's Margaret, watching out for me, making sure I'm safe. Because the truth is, there are dark things in this world, hidden just out of sight. And sometimes, a random choice, like renting a cabin in the woods, can plunge you into a nightmare you never knew existed. So be careful out there. And if a kind old woman ever warns you to leave a place immediately, take my advice. Listen to her. Your life may depend on it.